everyone and welcome to Esfinges' first international symposium. If you don't know what Esfinges is a project that aims to bring more women to the practice of historical European martial arts. Although Esfinges' main focus is women, we also work really hard in order to try to bring HEMA not just to women but also to non-binary people and members of the LGBTQ community. Give a Girl a Sword is a project that worked to encourage these goals every year by inviting clubs to bring more women and non-binary and LGBTQ people to their clubs. However, with this pandemic, unfortunately, that's not something that we can do. So we decided to take a little bit of a different approach. And we try to create different projects that not only help more women find historical European martial arts and being able to start the practice of HEMA at home, we also wanted to do some projects that help the community that it's already practicing HEMA. And this is how the International Symposium idea appeared. This symposium is definitely not going to be the last one considering the success of the first, so please make sure to leave your comments, make questions, and let us know your thoughts of it at the end in the comments. We also want you to understand that because of time constraints, although it did took us a long time of filming, it's really hard for us to really go deep in all the thoughts. So keep in mind that while something might feel like is not quite there yet, or it feels a little bit unfinished, or you would like to go a little deeper down in those topics, because of time we were just not able to do that. And this is why I think it's really important to do a second version of it. So please let us know what things you would like to hear more about, you wanted to get us deeper on those topics, or which things you really think that we missed talking about and you really would like to hear on the next round. That being said, if you're an instructor, a sister instructor, HEMA coach, and are really interested to join on our next symposium, please let us know and leave a comment as well. In this video, you're going to be hearing about 14 wonderful women and non-binary people who have worked really hard to be able to be in the positions where they are. We're going to learn from them, we're going to hear from their experiences, and hopefully we're going to make HEMA a little bit better through a simple video. Enjoy! Welcome to the first Esfinges Instructor Symposium. We have instructors from all over the world. This is probably a first. So the very first thing that I want everyone to do is I want you to introduce yourselves. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Mariana Lopez. I am from Mexico, currently living in the US. She, her, and I'm 29 years old, I think. Birthday on pandemic. And a fun fact about me is that I'm an internationalist, and that's actually one of the things that lead me to want to make Esfinges happen. All right, next.
I'm Sasha, they, she. I am in New York City. I have been doing HEMA since like 2013. And if you'll forgive the mess, you can see that I have a bunch of guitars. So that's a fun fact, is I collect instruments and can kind of play them.
I'm Marlene. I'm 30. US based, Alexandria, Virginia, specifically with capital codes defections. She, her. Fun fact, I'm very much into gardening and self-sustainability at this point. Garden is still coming, so we're still relying on grocery stores, but I think it'd be so cool to just get all of my produce where I can from the garden out back. So.
Oh gosh, so I'm next. So I'm Veronique. People usually call me V because they have issues pronouncing my name because I'm not from the States. I am an instructor in a Triangle Sword Guild in North Carolina, Raleigh area. As you may notice, I have a slight accent. I'm French initially. So I've been doing HEMA for about 8 years, but certainly less considering the amount of injuries I have had because I came into this being totally not an athlete at all. And fun fact about me, I got lost on a volcano that was in an eruption when I was very little, because I grew up on a little tiny island in the middle of the Indian Ocean.
That is super cool. Now we have to top that. Hi, I'm Jennifer Landels. I'm also known as JM Landels, which is my pen name. So I guess the fun fact about me is that I'm also an author. And I'm going to have to bail early from this because I'm also a publisher and I have a book launch for the magazine Pulp Literature, which is happening at 2 p.m. Pacific. I run Academy Cavallo, which is a school of historic equestrian arts. It's a sister school to Academy Duello. So we teach mounted combat. I also teach rapier and longsword and staff and dagger and whatever else. Yeah. Oh, and she, her, but I am never offended if you call me they.
I'm Amanda Drebeck. I'm in East Texas, but I'm originally from Oklahoma. I'm actually just assistant instructor, barely. Like I was kind of just getting started before the pandemic hit, so I'm just kind of here to pick up things as we go. I don't have any real experience with it. She, hers pronouns. A cool thing about me, again, pre-pandemic, I run a lot of marathons. So I've been actually doing at least one of those a year since high school, which I'm 34 now. So I'll let you do the math on how many that is. And then I kind of did martial arts on the side.
My name is Victoria Clow. Pronouns are she, her, but I'm also kind of fine for they as well. I'm from Glasgow in Scotland, and I'm still a relative newcomer to HEMA. I think I've only been doing it for about 2 years. Fun fact is that I'm a former international rhythmic gymnastics competitor for Scotland. So there you go.
Which one was your favorite?
I kind of changed every day because it depends on like what day you caught me. I think that's quite similar with a couple of people with swords that do multiple swords. They're like, no, today I feel like doing rapier. No, I don't like rapier today. Very similar with the apparatus for rhythmic.
I'm Lauren. I'm from Sydney, Australia, so it's definitely a wee bit early here for this. I'm 29. My pronouns are either she, her, or they, them. I'm really not that fussed. Yeah, there's a lot of weird things about me, but I think I'll just go with that I do aerials, so that's another way I get exercises and bruises.
I'm Robin. I'm age 41, primarily she, her pronouns, but they, them is also perfectly fine. I'm with Athena School of Arms in Boston, outside the Boston, Massachusetts area in the US. I've been doing HEMA for 3 years now, and have only been in the assistant instructor or instructor role only in like the past year. And fun fact, I am very much into like video games and anime, especially Studio Ghibli. So if you ever see at a tournament or someone wearing a no face mask, that's me.
I'm Emily. She, her, they, them is fine. I'm in LA, although I started in DC at CKDF with Marlene. Hey. And I guess my fun fact is I taught English in Taiwan for a year, which was really fun. Yeah, now I'm temporarily retired from the film industry.
Hello. I'm Lauren Danger Shaw. The danger is because I used to be a safety instructor. That's a long time ago. I'm 46 years old, been doing HEMA for 9 years after giving up jiu-jitsu. She, her are my pronouns. And a fun fact about me is that I'm actually a public relations and communications specialist, but I live in a place, Calgary, Alberta, in Canada, where there aren't really any jobs for that right now. There's not a lot of hiring going on. But we just started our new club. That's the other fun fact. We've only been official for 6 months, but it is my 9-year anniversary this month of starting HEMA. Yay, happy anniversary to me.
My name is Nathalie. I'm 33 years old from Quebec, Canada. I do longsword, rapier, and sabre. Sabre being my favorite. And a fun thing about me is I'm an airplane mechanic.
My name is Jessica Blair. I'm 34 from Charlotte, North Carolina in the US. My pronouns are she, her, though, they, them. Does not offend me at all. I've been doing HEMA since November 2016. My day job is as a data specialist, which is incredibly boring, so I try to make up for that with my hobbies. So fun fact is that in addition to doing HEMA, I also do pole fitness. And I was a complete couch potato before I did anything. So 3 years ago, I was extremely overweight, and I've lost over 100 pounds by being more active and doing HEMA.
My name is Lois Spangler. I am an instructor with the Brisbane School of Iberian Swordsmanship. I spend a ridiculous amount of my time poking my nose into festy 17th century books to translate Old Spanish into modern English. And my pronouns are she, he, them. I'm happy for folks to use whichever pronouns for me that you like.
I also realized I forgot to tell you guys how old I am. It's not that I'm embarrassed about it, but I am the oldest one here. So I'm going to be 55 this week.
That's awesome. I was going to say Merry birthday.
Merry birthday. That works.
Merry birthday. All right. So now we're going to do a very simple game. I'm going to be making a couple of statements. If the statement does not apply to you, I want you to either turn off your camera real quick or cover your camera, whatever works first, right? So you train with longsword. All right. You train with rapier.
I'm halfway covering it because I just started.
Yeah, I'm in a similar scenario. You train sword and buckler. All right. You train ringing. You train saber. All right. You train with pole arms. I'm going to show a little bit because I do a little bit of quarterstaff. All right. You train with other weapons that I have not mentioned. I should have mentioned sickle because sickle is fun. All right.
Because dagger's fun.
Or dagger, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, where's the dagger?
I don't know.
You're totally dagger partial here.
Yeah, I failed. All right.
And messer.
Look, it was like 2 a.m. All right, so next one. Cover your camera if you've been an instructor in HEMA for more than 10 years. So anyone here who has not been a coach in HEMA for more than 10 years, cover their camera. So I want to see who are the elderly. Hi, Jennifer. I barely make the cut. Like, it literally is like I've been doing HEMA for 12 years, but I had to find my club, so I had no other option. All right. You have been a coach in HEMA for at least 5 years. All right. You've been a coach in HEMA for at least 3 years.
Not officially.
All right. Coach in HEMA for at least 2 years. All right. Less than a year. All right. That's cool. We have a good mix. Who here has found their club or a club?
Founded?
Yeah, like you created your club.
I'm working on it, but
working on it too.
The pandemic kind of
If you're
put a
working on
kibosh
it, you're
on
on. You're working
great.
on it,
Then
you're
here
on.
I am.
All right.
I'm working.
Who in here currently, at this time being, runs their club?
I'm the treasurer of the club, and I
mean,
so I'm gonna say yes.
Yeah.
I'm the chairman of the club, but I don't really think that it qualifies as running it.
That's fair.
Right, there's so many people that help too.
All right. Who in here at some point has been the only women or non-binary person of their club?
In my weapon that I know of, I don't actually know the other classes, but yeah.
All right, that's fair. And stay on if in the place where you train, there is more than one woman or non-binary coach. I don't know, because HEMA-wise, I'm the only one, but we mixed with sport fencing, and there's another one, so half. All right, cool. So I don't know if everyone see the point of this exercise, but it kind of like starts making a little bit of a point. So what I want to reach with these, right, is one of the immediate topics to talk about as soon as we go through this process is the one thing that everyone wanted to talk about, which is diversity and inclusivity. So the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to read to all of you a statement, and I want you to tell me how do you feel about that statement. And so here it goes. What's your first reaction when you hear these? If you're a woman, a member of the LGBT community, a person of color, or a part of any minority, people immediately see you as the person in charge of being diverse, inclusive, and you have to be the expert on the topic.
I would say I'm only the expert because I chose to. No one expected me to do it. I jumped right in, decided to be the expert on it simply because I want to champion that.
I feel the same way. I started doing more of the Give a Girl a Sword days and things for my club because I wanted more women to join and be part of that. And I knew that I would have to do that. So I did it.
I was just going to say, I think that for somebody that's quite new, I have felt like quite overwhelmed by like the pressure to bring that. Does anybody else feel that?
Yes.
I have felt that, yeah.
Sure.
Definitely felt like I need to have the answers for things that I might not necessarily have the answers for, especially when I was newer and when I was the only female at one point. And I'm like, I can't tell you how to get more females. Like, I don't know. I'm too new to let you know. I just thought you guys were cool. Being cool.
I have a very similar type of experience. It's much more that all my life I have been described by things that to describe me more like as I am not a woman. So every time that someone say, yeah, but you're a woman, so you may want to have more women around, I'm like, I don't know, because I'm always feel like an outcast. So in any type of situation. So I'm not going to say that I am adhering by a specific gender because I don't know. Those are things where does not define me as a human being, and that's my approach, but it's not necessarily the right one.
I really enjoy doing Give a Girl a Sword Day classes, and any like sort of anything that gets more people that aren't just men into a club or aren't just white men into a club. They're always a lot of fun, and one of the reason why I enjoy it so much is that like I really love putting swords in people's hands, and then just this universal like, oh, I can't swear but I want to grin on everybody's faces, where it's just like, I got a sword, I'm gonna hit something with it. I wish I had the ability to do them more often. Yeah, I want to do more of them. I miss them. I miss fencing.
So to me, it was like a punch in the face. Like I didn't initially wanted it to be moving all this inclusivity and diversity, right? But I found at my club, I was the only woman. It was super hard for me to get, like, I remember trying to get people, and a lot of girls would be like, oh, but you're different. I was like, well, what does that mean? And I literally, like, someone suggested to do Esfinges, so Ruth, the other founder, suggested to do Esfinges, and I thought it was dumb. Then I went to the US, and there was like almost no women in my first international tournament. There was like 3 of us in a sea of like 60 people, and I got really upset about that because like, wait, that means that there's something happening, right? So I feel like it was forced into try to learn about inclusivity and diversity, not because it was a choice of mine at first, but because it just felt wrong. So this is one of the things that I want to point out, right? And this is why I'm asking this question, is like, many times someone says like, you're a woman, you need to know what other women need to in order to come take the classes. Like, that's not necessarily the case. So this is another one. Have you ever felt that when you go to a tournament, whether you fight in women's, in open, have you ever felt that you are in some way representing your gender or your community, right? Have you ever felt that? If you have not, close your camera.
I don't
Alright.
really do a lot of tournaments, so.
That's fair. But if you ever, right? So that's the other one that I want to go about, right? Like people don't realize that there's tends to be an added pressure by being a minority. And so that's kind of like the things that I want to talk about. So when we talk about ways to be more inclusive, right? There's always these basic things of how to be more inclusive. How you promote your club. You can be more inclusive on how you promote. You can be more inclusive in how your club is organized, right? You can be more inclusive in how you teach and how you address your students. You can be more inclusive in how your students behave. And you can be more inclusive in terms of how accessible it is to grow within your club. I love that cat. So I'm going to go topic by topic. I want to hear some thoughts. So being inclusive on how do you promote? What makes a promotion or what makes you targeting people to promote HEMA inclusive?
Well, I know I can speak towards, there's trying to find the right balance of promoting diversity and inclusion without looking like you're like force feeding it. Because I think a lot of times what people try to do is like the automatic response of like, I want to target more women, or I want to target more people of color, I want to target more LGBTQ plus stuff. It's like so much of it tends to be that some people like focus squarely on that, and then it becomes like, okay, you're overdoing it, and then that's a turnoff right there. So it's trying to find the right natural balance, and a lot of that is, like if people in your club already represent that, for instance, when you have your websites or your Facebook groups or something, making sure that those people are in the photos that you're showing on a regular basis. It's not this just one same group of people. Making sure that you're at events that lend themselves to more diverse groups of people there, and not be, okay, if I go to this particular convention that is primarily attended by cis white males, then of course that's going to be the makeup of people that you get in. But if you're able to project yourself that there's ways to show that you have people that are there and that are happy, that alone is usually the promotion in of itself. And that ends up being the word of mouth to be able to have more people like, oh, that person seems like they're having a good time. I should be there.
So will you say that the key to a diverse promotional will be representation? Well, that would be.
I think it helps without it having to be like I'm making, like, statements are okay, but it's like you want to be sure that if you're making statements on like your website or your club, that you actually can back them up, and it's not just fluff. It's like, we accept all people. But if your dynamics don't promote that, and like, again, if you're constantly taking photos of people that you don't show any of that, or you look at your board of trustees, that's a conflict. So you have to find what actually works. Yeah, what is your club doing that actually shows this? It's not just
yes, but if you're working towards becoming more inclusive because you're realizing that, hey, that's an awful lot of white faces around here. How do you, I mean, no, I'm serious, because that's also another question in trying it out and leading, and that's it's also a natural cycle, sorry. So it's a natural cycle where people will be coming, trying it out, seeing if it fits for them, and if it does not fit for them, then they leave. But how do you also help to say, hey, we're a cool place, we love you all, guys. That's also another question, because when you have already that representation, then cool. But you have a guy that looks really very white and tell me, yeah, well, I'm part Indian. It's like, yeah, cool, but I'm not going to put you because you say you're half Indian and does not necessarily reflect. So that's also the other thing. And I may be saying it very badly, and I apologize for that, but that's much more the type of questions that I have.
There's like a transformation process that ends up happening. Like CKDF recently went through like a cloistering effect where we kind of disassociated from the HEMA community as far as being outspoken and actively participating, because we really wanted to take a look at our club and the club culture we were promoting from within. And then from there, we tried a couple of different iterations to see how we could spark new membership and how we could retain that new membership. We had been doing beginner, like 3-week beginner sessions just to get them up to speed. And then they were immediately thrown into our common fencing class where we were doing cycles to kind of build on the new skills and this, that, and the other thing. But they weren't really, we weren't building that family sense of fun and kinship that we had when we did our last big beginner cycle. But we also recognized we didn't have the instructor bandwidth to really do something like that at the time. So it took us about a year to find our feet again. And the way we kind of came out land blasting, like, this is what we want to do. We want our club to be representative and inclusive. We want everyone to be welcome, regardless of certain aspects of behaviors that we don't want to promote in a club that we're all aware of, right? Like, we have a code of conduct that we wrote. We launched with a Gagas, Give a Girl a Sword. That was a huge success. It would have been better had COVID not immediately happened. But we had 30 people register. 30 people wanted to come and learn, and we tagged on a ring-in part of it because, I mean, Emily can speak to this too. You and I were the only female identifying participants in ring-in for forever, you know? Like, Kiana would come down when she could, but, you know, it's not the same thing. And a lot of it was because they were scared. They were scared of getting started. They were scared of being accepted, of being challenged, of being able to work effectively and not slow the class down. Like, they felt ashamed for limitations that their bodies have, which is completely okay. So I guess my diatribe is, you have to have a club foundation that's willing and able to back up these promotions. If you're going through iterations, that's okay. Document the iterations, talk about them, talk with your club mates, your club members who are actually members of this community, you know, who are allies of this community. It's the only way to really become an expert, I guess, to be.
So I totally agree with you. So I think that at some point, I wonder really if the word HEMA is a European piece in it. It's not too prevalent. And that's just a question that I'm throwing out there. Because what I'm saying is that, yes, we do have representation, and we have at our club, we have, like you say, totally worked on our culture for a long time, and we have really focused on making sure that it's a place promoting growth on that piece, and also being more inclusive in some places. But sometimes I feel like just showing to everyone, hey, that's a cool piece. You want to learn sword, you can learn sword. I remember that sometimes when one time I was moving to my apartment, and there were some guys that were talking and seeing all my sword and say, hey, what's all that? It's like, oh, it's because I do HEMA, historical European martial art. And it's like, oh, European, oh, you have an accent, so it's just for Europeans. I'm like, no. Wait,
like Irish dancing only for Irish people.
Yeah. I want to rescue a little bit of the conversation to the point and go directly to promotion, because one of the things that I've heard a lot about people say is they're trying to make their promotionals less scary. And by less scary, I mean the average martial art promotional is, martial art, tough you make, and they have like usually guys sweating, looking like really tough and angry. Like, they tend to be really angry promotionals. I don't know how to say that. And for example, one of the approaches that I've seen people take is, and many don't like the sport side of it, right? But like, they take like kind of like more the sport approach, and they have more like, they have men, women, non-binary, they have a board representation, right? They do include the gay flat collar, stuff like that. But the promotionals are more what you would call neutral, right? So you have cool people holding swords, and they make it less intimidating, less towards, it's about aggression. And just that alone, again, I'm Mexican. I'm supposed to be like sitting down and be nice and polite, and I'm not supposed to have any aggression with me. Anyone who does HEMA knows that there is a point of, we're doing essentially control aggression. We're agreeing to hit each other. It's violence. It's agreed violence. But you need to also, people who want to do it don't necessarily rationalize things that way yet. So you need to make them an entry that it's welcoming, right? So then they're willing to continue. So let's say that we already have a nice promotional, right? I do say, for example, you don't have any women in your club, do try to find some representation like, hey, we don't have women yet, but women exist. And like show resources of other women fencing, things like that allow you to bring people in. But your promotional is great. People arrive in. But then I arrive to your club. What is the entry process to your club? What makes you arrive to a club and say, hey, this place is inclusive? So you think of it as like your first day of fencing. You come to a classroom, right? You haven't taken the classes yet. You just fill up your entry process. What is it at the entrance of your club that makes it feel like it's welcoming to you?
Well, I'll start, since that's, as a public relations person, that's usually the role that I like to take on. So particularly as an instructor for introductory classes. And the first thing that I always do is I always want to big smile, meet the person. Of course, now we're not going to shake hands with anyone. And even though where we are, we can somewhat train again outdoors. We have to keep distance. But when we were running intro courses, or we did something, there's an organization here called Sport Calgary, and we ran a bunch of free sessions. The first thing to do is to welcome them, like to be excited, show that you're excited they're there. And it's that, if, you know, you were, Mariana, you were mentioning, you know, the tough martial art, you know, selling it as in, you know, big, vicious, muscly, I'm going to beat you up. And that's absolutely not the thing to do. The thing, they're nervous. They don't know who you are. So the first thing is to, like, big smile, be silly, welcome them, hand them a sword. Here, you know, here's the sword you're going to use today. Just get a feel for it. Swing it around. Like, no instructor, just, you know, do your thing. And you give them their space and let them kind of ease into the class. But I like to use a lot of humor. I will make jokes, you know, I will do little things like that. But I see it rub off. So our other members who will help with these sessions, they then do the same thing. They're welcoming, they make little jokes. They're self-deprecating about themselves. A lot of us are self-deprecating, I'm assuming. We've had that talk earlier. So that's part of it, is to make yourself seem like a normal human being. You know, you can poke fun at yourself, and you just, that kind of disarms that tension. And that's a lot of public relations things that I used to do as a career, where you have angry people coming to an open house session and they're upset about something happening in their neighborhood for the city, and you have to disarm that you have to take away that anger. So using those skills to someone who's nervous by showing them that you're just some goofy person, which I naturally am, and everyone who knows me knows it, that really just changes the dynamic. And so from the very first 30 seconds, they realize, oh, this isn't so intimidating anymore. And it really puts them at ease and makes them feel that they can interact.
This is a question for everyone. Does anyone feel like arriving and having to sign a code of conduct, will that immediately make you feel more comfortable or no? So I have the answer for that for me, but I don't know about the rest. So
I feel like that, depending on how everything else is, immediately being handed a code of conduct would either be like a code of conduct and waiver, and everything would kind of give me a little bit of pause. It's like, why is this the first thing? Like, why aren't we like talking? I definitely want to take care of it before class, before they started doing anything. But I do think that, like, personally, somebody who's new coming into a space should just have, like, you know, the time to sort of settle a little bit and, like Lauren was saying, relax and realize that we're all real humans. When I've been doing Give a Girl a Sword Day stuff, when people start coming in, I usually put whatever sword I'm holding down and then just sort of like smile and try and be super friendly and answer any questions, so they don't feel like, hey, there's this crazy person with a sword who's like smiling and laughing and that I don't know.
It's like the dog
that's fair.
barks.
Let me rephrase that one, because I guess it sounded the wrong way. Having a code of conduct in the club that you train in, like the presence of a code of conduct, does that, because the point that I'm going for is, like, if I arrive to a place and this is like, oh, here's swords, right? Just don't kill each other, that's fine. as instead of arriving here and then having like a thing in my paperwork, right? Not just like slap you with it, but like if the price of it includes a code of conduct in which it says like, you know, we're respectful, we welcome everyone, no racism, not sexism. Like to me, that makes an impact and make me feel safer because it gives me the impression that there's a system that will protect me. And if it doesn't, it's much easier for me to make the decision to leave out as soon as possible. Because I feel like it gives you a balance of like, I have a code of conduct and it's working, makes me safer, right? That something happens, I ask for it, it's applied, I feel even safer. As of there's no code of conduct, something happens, and it's harder to make the decision of whether you want to stay or not, or whether you're in a safe space or not. So that's what I was trying to get to at the code of conduct. Because to me, it does makes me feel safer, and it makes me more willing to try things.
So at Academy Duello, we have the code of conduct posted on a pillar, like on the wall. So it's just there for anybody who's even in the museum or wandering around. We don't hand it to students when they sign up. What we do hand it to them is the waiver, because we do need that liability waiver, you know, which says, you know, don't be an idiot. Swords can be dangerous if you used improperly. We may have to touch you to move your sword around, things like that. And it's the same at the stable, like, and, you know, nobody really even sets foot in the stable without signing a safety waiver. But code of conduct we have up on the website. So it's available for anybody who wants to see it or find it. We have it posted on pillars so that, and it's also up in the washrooms and in the change rooms. So it's just there. It's not like in your face here, you must read this and sign it, but it's everywhere and available.
No, I like that. I think, and again, maybe phrasing, but that I like, because I think like many places, they don't have any code of conduct at all. And to me, that always makes me frown a little bit.
Yeah.
We have an inclusivity statement that we use as the initial, and then the code of conduct is available on our website, our Facebook group. Inclusivity statement is posted just as virulently, really, so everyone can see it and read it. But on our waiver, we also include our statement of inclusivity, just so they kind of understand what they're getting into. So if they are coming in with malintention, they can kind of make that decision before committing time or money.
Earlier in this conversation, before we started talking about the code of conduct in particular and how that makes people feel more comfortable, I'd actually like taken notes and written down code of conduct. That way we can make one, because that's not something that we currently have, that I think is a really great idea, that I think would make people feel a bit more comfortable coming in.
All right, so we're going through steps, right? Building your club. We have our promotionals. People come in. They arrive. We're friendly to them. We treat them like decent, normal human beings, right? We don't arrive threateningly to things. We ease their nerves, which is much more welcoming. But then you start your class, right? And here's one of the things that are really interesting. Sport science, up to date, right? Because even if we look at it martial art perspective, sport perspective, sport science is what allows us how to essentially move around without breaking each other. And it's always been, through history, it's been catered to cis men. So most of the science that we have about activity, with a very few exceptions, is about cisgender men, right? And this also translates in the way that we learn how to teach and in the ways that we approach classes, even if we don't realize it, right? So how do you make sure that your way of teaching addresses everyone? Or what do you do to be more inclusive in your teaching? And more inclusive doesn't only mean women and LGBTQ and non-binary and people of color. It also includes people with disabilities, people with invisible illnesses. Like, how do you do in your teaching that makes your club diverse and inclusive?
All of the classes that I have taught have been very small, which I was kind of fortunate because I kind of let everybody start out. I, make sure everybody has enough room. And personally, I like to start teaching mechanics first. So that way, I know that all of my students, when they start to move, they're not going to move in such a way that'll be harmful for them. And since every body is different, it kind of gives me a time to, while everybody is doing, very basic cuts and very basic movements, it gives me time to sort of figure out how to best like help each individual person as I see them move, as I see them how they approach the sword, whether they're really scared of it or whether they're super confident in it or it's somewhere in between. But I really like to boil it down to it just needs to be every individual person, and you need to go to them and ask them, what feels weird, what's awkward, what is making you feel uncomfortable with these movements, and how can I alleviate that?
I think that's a great thing that you just said. I don't know if you realize is like go to each individual person rather than single them out. Cause that I've seen it done, and he's like, oof, like
the only time I will point out, I will point anybody out is if I see that one person is doing this really I'll only do that if it's a very positive thing. I won't do it to fix errors. If I see somebody's having some trouble, I'll talk to them in the corner and be like, hey, everything okay? You're looking a little frustrated, tired. Something isn't looking right. Is it okay if I give you some adjustments, or would you like a minute to just sit with it and figure it out? But if I see somebody doing something really, really well, and over time, it'd be like, hey, because one thing that helped me when I was learning was other people coming to me and being like, hey, I see you're doing this one thing really well. How can I guess it's a leftover how I guess I keep doing this. And people coming to me and asking me to explain how I did it to them. That's it. It kind of helped me learn how to do it better. Obviously, if somebody's not comfortable with that, I'll make sure that I don't put anybody on an awkward spot.
I think it's the reminder that HEMA is not one size fits all in multiple levels, and having to remember that as you're going through instructing to not think that everyone's going to fit this particular mold in their fencing ability or their physical ability or whatever. I can going off kind of what Sasha said, I know from a funny story when I was doing an intro longsword class and we were trying to do cutting mechanics and trying to be nice and saying this is I was the only intro student that had a larger test, and so sometimes it would be really hard to try to cut through, and someone would have I'd have to speak up and be like, I can't do this right because I'm having this limitation. And luckily I had, a woman instructor who was able to pinpoint that easily and be able to recognize this is a thing that isn't necessarily a problem, but we just have to work around it. So I think a lot of it is the awareness of knowing what your students can do or might have challenges, and making sure there's an open environment for them to feel comfortable to talk about if you have injuries, if you have limitations, if you have, past stresses or traumas that may limit you from doing this stuff, to have it be open enough that everyone's comfortable talking about it and trying to work with it as best they can, but also use it as learning experiences for everyone else so they get that it's, again, not one size fits all.
I also, and this is, I had this story. I was covering a class, and it's another instructor's class, and I was taking care of it, and we were doing through the class, and one of the students, which at the time was the only girl in that class, start feeling super DC and not feeling great. So I sit to her side, I bring him some refreshment or something, and we were talking through, and something come out in the conversation that I was like, you know what, it's actually kind of funny when it might not be what is happening, but this is just from my experience. Once upon a time, I was changing my birth control, and they create a huge, crazy hormonal imbalance, and it will be very tiring. Fencing was just kind of exhausting. I was getting dizzier faster until I kind of balanced up again, and her eyes lit up, and she looked at me and she was like, I just changed my birth control. And then she looks at me, so I'm not weak, I'm not, it's no, this happens to everyone, right? But if your coach is a guy, how do you address those things, right, without it being awkward? Because the other thing is not everyone has the privilege of having a an instructor that is aware of these things. So would anyone feel uncomfortable? Like, how do you address your class in a way that these topics are out there for people who are not ready to ask them, that they still get this information? Like, your boobs are on the way, or the hormonal process that you're going through is going to affect your training. Like, how do you put out there so your students feel welcomed without feeling like boobs, right? Like, without making it like weird.
One thing that I like to do, I mean, Sasha, you had mentioned, to go over to them, don't single anyone out in front of class. So when we've got new people, I like to, so if, we're team teaching or whatever, and we all go through, whether it's men or women, but of course, I understand there might be other factors. So we go through and individually talking to them. And I like to reassure them as well. One of the things is that, okay, this isn't something that you just learn, on week 2, week 3, suddenly you're really good at it. This is going to take time. And to kind of be open and say, and, your body, my body is different. I had to learn differently. And just to explain my own experience of learning, it's like I have a wonky hip, and my doctor says, oh yeah, lots of women have a hip SI joint that locks. So I explain this, my situation, that I've got a hip that locks, and how do I get around that, and just be open to that. So Mariana, like you were telling your story, so I'd use the same technique, but also to reassure them that it's okay to take time to learn this. No one has to be perfect. No one has to learn it really fast. Like, I mean, and also do that for men, because a lot of men, especially young ones, they think that they're going to come in and learn sword fighting, and no one has. I've only ever had one person say, "I can't hit you. You're a girl," and he was a young kid. He doesn't train with us.
Oh, we're gonna go there soon. Don't worry. Yeah. We're gonna talk about that.
But even regardless of gender, just explaining that, oh yeah, everyone's body is different. Even 2 different guys are going to have 2 different ways that their elbows move, for example. And just be open and just go individually and share these stories. And then they bring up these things in more group conversation. They feel comfortable talking about it, maybe with a few other people and me. And suddenly that also builds that, now that we're going back about welcoming people, that makes them feel more secure. They feel like they're in a safer space to learn, because people are willing to talk about what's going on. And that creates a much stronger bond in the club.
I'll say utilize your other instructors too. Like,
yeah,
we have a a non-binary instructor in training, and then there's me, and then the rest of them are, for the most part, dudes. Like, how do you have a boob conversation with someone if you're not there to have that boob conversation? Like, I'm not always going to be there. I'm not always going to be leading the beginner instructor class. So how do you train your male counterparts to carry that torch and continue having that discussion? Like, it's okay for them to have the boob conversation without actually being like, yo, boobs, right? So, like, there's a way to do it and do it right. So when we train it now, it's, hey, if you are going to bend your elbows, if you have a larger chest, right? Because this goes for, bodybuilders and stuff too. We have people who are stacked and they just have more mass they have to get around. It's not necessarily just boobs, it's pecs. So, like, how do you train that, right? Like, you can bend your elbows, bend them equally, and then, like, we'll do a push-up game where, you do a push-up, right? And if it's equally bent, it's more structurally sound. If you do one push-up and then one elbow's bent, you're going to collapse because it's bad structure. Like, it's weakening one side. So you can kind of use their bodies so they feel their own structural weaknesses, so they can make those changes and accommodations on their own without making it super weird.
I also like the idea of, like, introducing people. Like, I'm a cis woman, so sometimes when it comes to, like, some troubles of transgender students, especially if they're going to transition, and I just don't know what the process is. So, and for example, to me, that's one of the reasons I ended up doing Esfinges, right? It's like, hey, go here. There might be someone who can answer your question that you will be comfortable with. And how much research can I do so I can try to be like, this does not apply to me. This is what I've investigated, but this is somewhere else where you can go to. Because that's the other one that is like, for example, how do you address body situations in teaching without causing people to have dysphoria halfway through your class. Like, I think all of that is really important to consider.
Yeah, what we do, we actually take a lot of care about this as an instructor group at my school. We'll actually have sessions where we talk about the kind of language we use and how we use language, and we normalize talking about these things. So like when I'm talking about, because I do more rapier and it's quite profiled, because I'm built with wider hips, not necessarily because I am a woman, but because I'm built with wider hips, that means holding profile in a particular way can actually be bad for my knee. So when we talk about things like this, we don't say, okay, so women are going to have this issue. We say people with wider hips.
Yes.
So and we normalize talking about this stuff. So in instructor meetings, we have at least two women instructors, because we have some people who sort of cycle in and out because they've got other obligations, like university obligations, things like they can't teach all the time. But we normalize talking about these things in a group so that like I can sit and be talking with another woman instructor being like, yeah, I found that when my cycles are really, really bad, I just can't do this. And they're like, yeah, that's really important. And so the men in the group can be like, okay, we weren't, like, we knew it could be an issue, but all we hear are the stereotypes. So can you talk us through it? And then it gets talked about in class sessions. So talking about these things in a respectful, calm, normal, grounded way becomes normalized. And then students can feel free to either talk to us in a session, or when we take our mid-session, like our mid-class break, they can come and approach us. And for instance, if one of our male instructors is like, you know what, not that I don't feel comfortable talking about it, but I don't have the facts for you, why don't you go talk to Lois, or why don't you go talk to Kate? They're going to be able to help you out. So it's a kind of normalization and group support that we try to do for that kind of thing.
So we have a promotional. You arrive to your club, you feel welcome. Your teacher is fantastic. They know how to address all these body part issues, uncomfort, hormones, all these things in a way that it's friendly, right? You know that LGBTQ is welcome because of the code of conduct or like the imagery that you use. But then you arrive to your class, your instructor gives the instructions, and you are stuck to students. How do you work how your students behave? So behavior at the club, at the end of the day, I strongly believe it lands on the shoulders of the instructors. The instructors build off their students. But how do you, like, your students will come with a background, with a baggage, with things that they already think they're acceptable. So what is it that you need on a student that makes a club welcoming? How do you address things in a way that will allow your students to adapt to your new environment without scaring them off, right? For example, mansplaining will happen all the time, and you want to avoid that in your class, but you don't want to kick out every person who does mansplaining, because the reality is 99.9% of the men that will arrive will come with a background in which mansplaining is okay. And you, instead of just kicking them off, you want to give them the chance to adapt, to learn how to not do it. So how do you deal with inappropriate behavior? How do you reteach your club to not do inappropriate jokes? Because a lot of times your club is built and you realize that you're doing this thing that is not so great, but it's already within your culture and you need to make that shift. What makes the behavior of your students welcome? And how do you build and how do you foster that healthy club culture?
I think a part of it is definitely showing how we respond immediately when things are said. So obviously, you know, if somebody does try to mansplain, just advising them that you hadn't finished explaining, or where you've received your information from, or your background, just so that way they can understand that although they might have information, and, you know, that's all welcome, we're always happy for more information, you know, we also are knowledgeable on this topic and our voice is worth hearing. I'm quite lucky that I lead the warm-ups, and I'm also usually partnered with our beginner students, so their first lessons are with me, and I am very quick to pull people up politely. I sound like a little chipmunk, so it helps. I really do think, like, being small and female has made me really disarming in a useful way. I used to be concerned about it, but it means that now I feel like I can pull people up, but give them a smile and just, as long as I'm not rude about it and let them know, oh, actually, blah, like give them an alternative or potentially ask if they meant something else by it to give them that opportunity to self-correct. It allows them room for growth without feeling confronted. So yeah, I've definitely pulled up even more senior students occasionally when they've said something where I've just been like, that's not okay. So I've just kind of been like, hey, buddy, just letting you know this. And they've always received the feedback really well. I've never had anybody feel, like they need to get aggressive with me about it. So yeah, I think it's definitely the approach of do it fast as soon as it happens. And just make sure that it's more of like a feedback session or, constructive criticism and not just like, you Sorry.
For really egregious behavior, I learned a great technique from a mod on Twitch, which is, we don't do that here. That phrase, said in a variety of different ways, can give enough space for the offender to be like, oh, and either self-correct, or it gives you enough room to be like, no, we do not do that here. You can more strongly enforce your stance against that behavior. But I completely agree, Lauren, you got to step in real quick. The moment it happens, you're like, hey, we don't do that here. As for the mansplaining thing, because the instructor team is so close-knit, like we work so closely together, the men in the team will just naturally model listening respectfully to women. So like, I'm in a position where I have a lot of intellectual authority. I do a lot of the translating for our school. So there's always a lot of deference to me in certain parts of the curriculum when it's like, oh, well, what do we do with the, hang on, Lois translated this bit. Maybe she'll remember what that whole phrase was about. So we have active modeling of respectful listening and respect of authority. And when it inevitably does happen that you get somebody sort of overstepping the bounds, just like Lauren described, it's like, all right, thank you for that. That's actually not what's happening here. If you give me a second, I'll explain it more broadly. But keep in mind this thing that you said, because that does have an application to what we're doing. So like, you give them a little bit of liberty, but you also mark out where they are absolutely not correct.
So one of the things that I started doing as a habit, and it made a world of a difference, is whenever I start my classes, particularly introductory classes, like, this is the exercises we're going to do. If you have any questions, if it's not working out, raise your hands and I'll go to you, right? And then I will sometimes add to make sure, like, and I just make it like an overall, like, hey, just make sure, right? The questions, I'm here to teach you, I'm here to coach you. So unless your partner asks you something, if you think the exercise is not working, call me. And I just say this generic, like, because sometimes we think that the other person is not doing the right things, and sometimes it's us. And that immediately kind of like gives you an instruction of how to proceed, and it cuts down the mansplaining without having to address people like radically at the start, at least in my experience.
So we've, with our beginners, like, as we rotate them in or like blend them in with our existing classes for ease of assimilation, I don't know if I like that word, but you know what I mean, like forming that cohesive bond with everybody, we take a step back from technique training and instead focus on being a good partner, and we train that behavior, right? So like, with each drill that the instructor assigns, like me, Will, whoever, right? It doesn't have to be even, like, it could just be after class sparring, whatever. There's always a focus. Everybody has a goal going in. So how do you make sure that you're being the best partner for the person that you're working with? If you're over explaining and you're over talking, because like, I know I can do this too, right? Like, I get excited. I'm like, oh, let's fix everything. Oh, let's talk about all this stuff, right? And like, it's not the time or the place. Right now we're working on this. Right now our goals are this. That's it. How do you do that effectively? How do you do that safely? How do you do that with skill gaps? We talk about it, we train it.
And I like it because once you, like, I think people don't realize that once you have a strong group of students who are like, know what to do, they will even call each other out as like, hey, like, this is not the place. But all right, so we know how to promote. promote. Your club is well organized. You arrive, everything is set up for success, right? Your teacher is great. Your students have a great behavior. There's this one last part that makes an impact. How accessible is to grow within your club, right? Because many times, and this is true for many, it's like as soon as there's a woman or a non-binary, an LGBTQ instructor, it's much easier for people to instantly feel more welcome and the numbers just grow, right? But at the same time, it's like, how do you make sure, because this is true for many, right? Like many women, I will notice that there's a lot of women who want to get into like more big positions in their clubs, right? LGBTQ people who want to go to their clubs into higher positions. How do you make sure that it is accessible and easy to grow within your club in a way that minorities have a chance without making it unfair or look biased, right? Because this is one argument that I've heard a lot, which is like, well, every time that we talk about how you should have women instructors, then we're giving preference to women and you're only focusing on that one woman so she can be a coach and you ignore the other 10 guys who could be coaches. Like I've heard that argument a lot. So how do we make sure that it is accessible to grow within your club? Understanding that naturally for the way the society works, even if your club is super friendly, sometimes that process of growing or that process of feel that I deserve to grow to become an instructor, right? This is another big one. How do you make that possible and accessible?
And I'm clear, defined requirements for advancement for each rank and everything else. And just make sure that that is, you know, add it into the code of conduct, add it into your curriculum, add it into something, and make sure that everybody can see it. So that way, when time comes to promote somebody or time comes to, you know, start looking for, you know, that assistant instructor or somebody to lead a beginner class or a study group, all of the requirements and all of the things that you're looking for are just, you know, put them next to the door, put them on like a pillar, put them, you know, in changing rooms, the gear rooms, and, you know, right before you start, you know, rank testing, make sure that you say the requirements again. So that way it's just like nobody is surprised going into it and nobody is like, well, what do I have to do? It's kind of a secret. And that will at least make it clearer. I am not sure if that is enough.
Very quickly, plus transparency in your decision-making process. Like when I was brought in as an instructor, basically it was done because I enjoyed supporting people in class. I was one of those people that had to be like, you need to stop explaining things if people aren't asking you to explain things. I'm like, oh yeah, that's actually a good point. But if you make your decisions transparent, like when my promotion to instructor was announced, it was announced to the school group as a whole, and people were told why I was put into that position and what people could expect from me. And those expectations, like Sasha says, are clearly delineated in many different places in terms of the school, whether it's online or on actual signposts, that kind of thing. But transparency and decision making can make a big difference.
Yep, I'll second that. Transparency is key. But on top of that, instruction isn't the only thing that makes a club successful. It's not the only thing a club needs to function. So we also have, at ours specifically, we have, you know, an assistant instructor path, we have a coach path, we have a full instructor curriculum development path, right? Like we're hashing all of those out because we have a bunch of new people now that all want to get involved, that all want to help. But maybe teaching isn't what they want to do. Maybe coaching isn't it. Like we have in-club events that need help. We have, you know, Esfinges and all of these other forums and areas that need presence and exposure and research. So we have subcommittees essentially where people are in charge of the armory, like have the mats been cleaned recently? How are you flagging those? How do we know? Like what are we doing with the mats? How are we doing with this, and this? We have responsibility designations, I guess, so they still feel like they're helping. And then through what they're able to demonstrate with those responsibilities and accountability there, then if they're still interested in becoming an instructor, we can talk about it and go from there.
All right. So now that we have an inclusive club and a class, would anyone say that being a good instructor is different from being a inclusive instructor?
Yes, well, to an extent. I think obviously better instructors are naturally inclusive, but I remember having to learn certain things myself just because obviously women's hips and things are different, and learning how to move slightly differently, or the fact that I'm significantly shorter than a lot of the guys who I started with. You know, they're all like 6 foot tall, broad-shouldered humans, and I'm sitting there like 5'6", being like, I can't reach you. This is going to be interesting. So I was definitely able to work out some stuff myself. My teacher did help me. I was definitely given assistance once it was seen that there was disparity. And obviously now I've been doing it for 6 years, so I'm able to help others I can see with similar issues, so that's good. But yeah, I think sometimes we'll have people there, we're like, they're a good instructor, but. And I think sometimes if, you know, the inclusivity isn't super obvious, that can sometimes be the but.
All right, so I'm going to move on. So we have our clubs, right? We're great at building our clubs, but the thing is, there are challenges outside of the club, and we can't control those. We can only face them. So one of the instructors, when all of you signed up for this, I put a little bar underneath that says like, kind of like write down topics that you would like to talk about. One instructor wrote one thing, and I just want to read it as is, and I would love to hear your answer, because this one hit me in many personal levels, because it has happened to me a lot. How to deal with I don't fight women wisely and calmly. What would be your response to that? How do you deal with I don't fight women in a wise and calm way?
Usually on this one, what I've seen is much more other male fighters that will come to this person and laugh at them very hard and say, yeah, good luck, because you can fight this person and you're going to get your ass kicked. So that's one of their way of doing it. You can have this approach on that. That's one way that I've seen it being handled.
And anyone else gone through this? Because that has happened to me many times. So I was wondering, yeah. Victoria?
I had a student, it was back when I was still technically a student before I became an assistant teacher. And I'd been going there for about a year and a half, something like that. And this dude walks in, he's probably about 40, bald head, big muscly guy, says he has a background in like wrestling and boxing. And after his first couple of lessons for his first bout, he gets put with me. And he just looks at me and goes like, oh, I'm scared I'm going to hurt her. And luckily, my teacher just looked at him, looked at me, looked back at him and went, yeah, it's not her I'm worried for. Having the support of other people, especially in positions of power, is amazing. You know, or just fostering that kind of, okay, questioning as to why that would be. Yeah, and then just potentially fighting someone else if you have to show to them that there's no issue with men or women. It's just great. I kind of enjoy it too much.
I'm quite new to everything still, and I would still consider myself quite new to everything. And I think that never will go away. But I've had like sort of sparring meetups where people have come to me, and I'm 5'4", 5'5" max. I'm not a tall person, and there's been sort of big guys that have come up to me and gone, and I've gone, do you want to fight? And I've been super eager and just bounced up to them and gone, oh no, I'll break your arm. And I'm like, please don't. What? I'd rather you didn't. But also I feel like in that circumstance, like when there's no one around, that's when I struggle. Like when somebody's sort of saying this one-to-one to you and you've just gone up really eager, like, do you want to have a spar? This is fun. I want to try fighting different people. And somebody's gone, no, for something that's related to your size, something, and this could be like anybody. It could be related to your size. It could be related to the fact you've got a disability, or anything like that. And they say no to you for a reason that's not something safety wise. Like you should be able to monitor your power, for example, so that you can fight somebody that's like my size and a beginner, even if you're quite advanced. like I wouldn't have known at that time like how to deal with that, and no one around me really at the time, no one around me defended me or said anything was wrong about that. So I took my cue from everybody else. And like, it's really, just to say, it's really good for me to like be in this situation and hear everybody talking about, for example, Lois saying you've got to confront the person at the time, because that's been quite an issue for me in the clubs that I've been in. Nobody kind of confronted the issue and everyone let it happen. So that's something that contributed to me feeling really uneasy, and that lost my confidence. So when that guy said that to me, I just accepted that and I just went, okay, sorry, I'll go and find someone else, instead of saying to him, no, you should just fight better.
I think that's an important one, because I do remember tournament, guy was going to fence a girl, did an awful, like, he was moving like that, had a conversation later on. He was like, well, I don't fight women. I don't think women should fence. And I was like, right? Like, I think, like, if you're in an event in which someone is being, like, in a tournament, if someone is being that much of a jerk, you don't have any place here, right? But other than that, I think, like, to me, what's important to understand is, like, people need to ingrain in their brains that control is the displays of true capacity of performing the art. If you feel like you cannot train with someone because you feel like you're going to injure them, that doesn't speak bad of the because I'm 4'11", like I'm 1 meter 53 centimeters, like I'm tiny, right? It's like, if you feel like you're gonna hurt me, you are not a good fencer. You are the one who needs to learn how to train. And if you think that you're gonna hurt me for the fact of me being a woman, not for being small, but for the fact of being a woman, then those are deeper issues that you need to work on, right? So I think, to me, like, one of the ways that I'll respond is, like, I don't fight women. I don't know how to respond calmly and wisely. I would respond angrily and aggressively and be like, that just
you
means
know,
that you're a bad fencer.
That's there are two things. Do you have someone that say, I'm afraid to hurt you? And in this case, it's a question of control and how you control yourself. And the other one is a question of, I don't want to fight you because you're X. And on this piece, yes, that is the element that is usually totally unacceptable. And usually when I've heard that, I'm saying, well, you're welcome to come and fight me and find out. Because I'm not afraid to fight this guy. And this guy can tell you that this guy that is like this Marring Tower can tell you that, yeah, she's kicking my ass. And that's a way of doing it. But I totally also hear about when you're newer into this art, when you start hearing that. When I've heard it from people that were instructors, they'll say, I know I'm very strong and I don't want to hurt you. And I'm like, in this Thornhouse play, actually, you being and doing your strong here teaches me how to have proper form, because my structure is going to break your strength. Mm-hmm. And that's also a different shift into the discussion. So you have a question of, are you trying to on purpose hurt me? And in this case, you have no place in the ring, and none, because sparring or doing drills or whatever is first a question of communication of what you're trying to work on, what the other person wants to work on, and having discussion. But I've talked too much, so please.
No, and I think
no.
I was going to say, I think this is how we make HEMA inclusive outside of our club. We don't control what happens outside of our club. I mean, if you run an event, yes, you control things. But even then, like, when we're in a broader type of situation where there's a lot of people around, this is not like our club in which we can control things. But we do have control over how we support each other and how we let other people know that this is not cool. Because I think one of the reasons many women end up quitting HEMA is not because their club wasn't amazing. It's because when they went out somewhere else, they were received in a way that makes them feel like they're not capable, like they're not good enough. Unwelcome, yeah. And if I have to constantly, it's like, why would I do this if I feel like I'm too weak for people to fight me, if I'm too bad at
people
fencing
don't take
for
you
people to fight me?
seriously. Yeah. So there's one method that I've come up with, and it actually has to do with the fact that I'm fat. I'm like a size 22, 24. And fortunately, the Australian HEMA scene has not treated me poorly. Like, no one, except for a couple of obnoxious people that we all know are problem children. Lauren knows exactly who I'm talking about. No one's ever done that to me. But like when I'm in the gym, you know, sometimes I see a couple of people giving me dirty looks. So I've developed this whole idea, which relies on a law that's already been given, which is when you get confronted by someone who doesn't want to take you seriously, that's really painful and that's really difficult to stand up against. So what I want to advise you to do is to take what Berika said, which is it's their problem, not yours. If they're not willing to engage you as an equal, that doesn't say anything about you. It says everything about them. Now, number two, once you have that little seed, that little fiery seed in you to be strength to confront, then you channel your inner 5-year-old and ask why. So, you know, oh, I don't want to fight you. Why? Well, no, that's not an answer. Why? You're a girl. Do you understand how stupid you sound? It's 2020. Do you still want to carry this line? Or if they say, oh, well, I might hurt you, I'm like, oh, well, maybe I don't want to fight you if you have such a lack of control. But getting to that point, like, you almost have to rehearse that in your head and sort of be ready for it should that arise. Because that's sort of what I had to do for myself. There's a couple of times I've been mansplained quite badly in a gym where I'm, you know, trying to do intervals on a rowing machine and the guy comes over and says, hey, would you like to learn how to use that? I'm like, I'm doing that quite well. Would you kindly go away? You know, doing a little bit of daydreamy role play where you actually say these lines with confidence and you imagine the responses that you'd like to get, that can actually be enormously helpful if you know that you might be confronted.
Can I ask a question related to this? So I haven't had to deal with this kind of question. I mean, everyone dealt with it at some point, but what I see much more frequently is the less direct confrontation, where especially if you have an intro class or a new group, and I don't have this much experience in HEMA, but I've seen it in other martial arts, is you say, okay, here's the drill, now everyone pair up. And what immediately happens is all of the guys turn to each other, and all of the women who maybe, if there's any at all, if there's an odd number, then maybe you get a group of 3 women, but there's just this immediate, like, pairing by gender.
So what are, oh, sorry.
I don't, you know, and if you're the odd woman out, then do you even stay with the seminar or do you just leave right there? Because I definitely consider
as an instructor, you rotate people constantly. You rotate partners every single time.
Make their teams. Okay, so you see the other thing. If you're insecure and you're not really certain about sword, and the first thing you need to do is find a partner, you look at their faces. All the adults turn like into 3-year-olds that are terrified and they're holding to their mommy like, don't make me chew, don't make me chew. And usually when they do that, they will and pick someone at their side. And if you're in the corner, they will just panically look at you like, so what I do is don't make them choose their teams. Make the teams yourself and rotate all the time, right?
That's a great idea because I've been to both types of seminars and where they pair you up goes so much smoother. If you let them pick, it immediately clicks.
So if we're in like a class scenario, we take count during warm-ups of how many people we have. So we'll know instantly if we have to have a group of 3 or if we're going to have an odd person out, and we'll rotate with the assistant instructors who's going to take that person. So we'll have a different odd man out every time. And if we have a fair amount of experienced people in our classes, we'll be like, hey, you know, find a new person. Like, we'll put your hands up who's been doing HEMA for 6 months or more. Great, find somebody who's been doing it for 6 months or less. And if we have people who are like hoarding on one side of the room, it's immediately, all right, go across the room and find a new person. It should be somebody whose name you don't know. Learn their name. You're working with them for the next 3 minutes. We force the interaction, so we force the communication within our classes and our clubs so we don't have these weird clicky things happen. And I'll call people out too. If I'm like, you know, I've seen you 2 work together literally all night. You come here, you go there. Like, we'll break them up if we have to, but normally our guys are good about rotating.
Here's the other thing, and this is something that I've noticed that a lot of, not everyone, but a lot of instructors kind of like connect with. And this is also why a lot of women quit, which is like, these whole situation, these scenarios force us to have to be tough, right? We have to be resilient. We have to be resistant. We have to, sometimes it turns to defensive, right? And one of the things that someone mentioned, and again, this is also kind of like personal, so I don't know if I'm just chose based on, I try to be varied, but kind of hit me on crying. Sparring in tournaments, crying is a sign of weakness, right? It's super criticized. I'm lucky enough to know a very handful of men who don't shy about crying, right? Which is super rare. Like the first time that I saw a man crying, I was like, what's happening, right? And if you're a HEMA instructor, if you're a HEMA fencer, and you have to be tough, having the feeling to cry or crying, I've noticed that to a lot of fencers, it really throws them down because it defeats the entire I'm capable type of build that they have to create by themselves. So
That's it?
No, I'm saying that people get the impression that by crying, they're completely tearing down this idea that they're tough. So it is very demanding. So crying in sparring of tournaments, has it happened to you? Do you see it as a sign of weakness? Do you hide it? How do you deal with it? So I guess my first question will be, if you have never cried while fencing, cover your screen. If you're okay with me single this one out, I'm fine, because I've cried plenty of times. So how do you deal with crying? Like, how do you feel about that? Does it bother you?
No. I mean, everybody cries for different things. And, it could be, I'm overwhelmed. I'm having a really bad day. Like, my body is just not wanting to do what I need it to do. It could be, wow, what I thought was hurting me didn't hurt me that bad, but now I'm halfway through class and oh my God, it's killing me at this point. Like, people cry for various reasons. It could just be adrenaline. It could be an adrenaline crash, lack of sleep, hormones. Like, normalize it. If I'm crying, and like we had people with our Monday advanced longsword class that were really nervous about joining in because these people have been doing it for way longer than they have. I'm like, dude, seriously, I left that class crying for 6 months because I felt so stupid. But at the same time, it made me want to learn. And I told him flat out, like, it made me want to learn. It made me want to keep coming so I could figure it out. Like, yeah, I was crying while I was doing it, but everybody was really welcoming, and I realized I was the one putting the pressure on myself. I was making myself cry, not somebody else, And like, being able to verbalize my thought process and share that with other people kind of makes it easier and okay for them to also open up.
Yeah, normalizing is key. Normalizing is key.
And also talking about it as being a natural response when you get first into a stressful situation, like it's your first time sparring and it's something where you have all those ideas where, I'm going to be Shira and totally crush this guy, and then you don't. And it can be, and you have to manage with those things, or you can just have a natural adrenaline response to that. And I think that crying and showing vulnerability is actually showing that you are in a place that isn't comfortable, but you are in a place of growth. And that normalization, like you're saying, Lois, is key.
And if you don't necessarily feel, whether you're introverted or like whatever, that you aren't in a place to do that, especially like in a tournament or a sparring setting, have your coach be that. So if you could at least convey that to your coach and they can be supportive of it when you're in a thing, and like, say you have a pass and all of a sudden you break down crying, at least if you can't be in a position to do so, your coach can be able to speak and and support you on your behalf to be like, this is okay, give her a moment, we'll get right back into it. Again, normalizing it in whatever way is possible.
Yeah, I was gonna say, every time that I'm super challenged, I cry. If I'm doing something that it takes me, every time that I go out of my comfort zone, I just whipped like a baby. And I'm not angry, I'm not sad. I just literally, you see my face, right? And there's like tears coming up. So I would, for the longest time, I had to talk to my training partners. I'd be like, hey, halfway through it, I might start weeping. It's fine, just keep on working. And at first it was kind of like, and they were cool with it. And so now it doesn't happen as much, but I will be training and halfway through like doing a drill, I'm gonna be like, right, like sobbing, but it's fine. And then I end the drill and it's like, oh, I did that. Whew. And then
and you have also people who start laughing. And just start laughing, and it's just really, but it's so super important to say that those reactions to stress are totally normal.
I would say as instructors too, it's important to keep an eye out for that stuff too. Like, yes, especially like during your classes, because regardless of whether or not they're putting themselves in a dangerous situation, I don't want them to hit that point of frustration or that point of being so overwhelmed that they have this emotional override that kicks in. So if I see somebody having this issue, right, like I'll be like, hey, you know, go grab a drink, take 5, come back, you know, and I'll walk over with them while they go and they get that drink, and I'll check in. Like, are you okay? Is this still too hard? Are we not, you know, what's happening here? Like, let's talk about it for a second. And if they need a minute by themselves, that's fine. But because I've made myself available and escorted, essentially, I've kind of presented myself as a safe person to talk to if they need to. And it's great too, because I'll have people like, you know, like, I'm having a bad day, I'm gonna be in and out. Like, it's me, it's not you guys, I know it's me, right? And like, they're totally cool with just sitting out a drill that's setting them off, and they'll come back. But because we've established the classroom as that safe place for them to do that, to experience pushing themselves and recognizing their own emotions, it's world of difference. And I think Kaya calls it opting in instead of like excluding people from her book, and I'm like, genius.
Yes, I think it refers a lot to something we're talking about, consent.
I was just going to ask who has read her book, because it's really phenomenal.
Who has what?
Read Kaya's book.
Oh,
Fear is the Mind Killer. Yeah, it's really worth reading.
Non-sponsored.
We've been basing a lot of new admin and instructor decisions on things that we've learned in that book. But one thing that I wanted to just briefly mention, which I didn't know and I learned very recently, is that, and I'm going to do a little bit of gendered talk, and I apologize for that, but generally speaking, women have a different adrenaline response to men. For men, adrenaline will be like bang, bang, very quickly. It's just like it ramps up, they have it for a brief amount of time, and then it just drops down. For women, it takes women longer to come up to speed adrenaline-wise. And then there's a longer plateau, and then there's a much slower drop-off, which is why sometimes when you see arguments between a man and a woman, the dude will get all head up and then be fine, and the woman's sitting there going, but we haven't resolved this, because there's still all that chemistry pumping in the back. So I learned it in a seminar about writing fight scenes, which is interesting because it means if you pair up, you know, a male character and a female character that can play off each other like badass superheroes. You know, the dude jumps in, does all the hard stuff real quick, softens up the big dude, and then the woman can come with sustained energy and then take him out. Like, that was the way that was written. But there is research that says that generally speaking, those are like, there's overlap, but that's sort of what the profiles are. Yeah, so when you find yourself an attorney and you're like, I'm just not there, and then only 3 fights in, you're like, okay, I'm feeling my groove. And then the tourney is over and you're like, I have all this stuff left over, what the heck do I do? That might be one of the things that's coming out as crying.
I just kind of wanted to echo that, having lived both extremes of that, because before I transitioned, it was very much like, great, cool, I have a bunch of energy really, really quickly, and now I'm going to sleep. And then, like, at Fectia, it was the pool fights, I was half present. I think the fight I had with Robin was the first one where I was actually, like, present. And then I wound up sobbing in bed at my girlfriend's place in Washington Heights that next night, because I was still, like, it was 1 a.m. and I was still wired and trying to come down from all of this tournament stuff. And like, it was a trip.
Yeah, basically I had the same thing happen to me at the tournament, because I had to fight simultaneously 2 small finals, the longsword and the rapier one, like back to back, and I was like overwhelmed.
At the end of our fight, there's a great photo of Natalie and I, and I just fell. My legs gave out. I was just like, all right, great. I'm too stressed to keep standing, so I'm gonna like sit down and laugh hysterically for 5-10 minutes.
I'm really glad
the Battle of Titans.
Because I've been talking about this periodically with other instructors and other members, if any of this had ever happened to them too, because you know, in ringing, it's crazy because the guys are so quick to just like immediately like, I'm wrestling.
Yes.
Right now we're wrestling. Let's go. And I'm like, I need the drill. I need the warm up. I need to like ease myself into it. I can't just immediately flip that carnal switch. So how do you do that? And I'm so glad you said that. And like, I think John Durish somehow tapped into this without like putting your words to it, I guess. But at Capital Clash this year, Mariana, he like, we went and we warmed up for a solid half hour, 45 minutes, and we were just like free sparring. But by the time I got to the ring, I was ready to go. Like I was on. I think that's why though, like the adrenaline makes so much sense.
Yeah, that's why I always swim before wrestling. But well, so the next topics, obviously the who we are and how do we identify obviously still kicks in. But again, what I want to point out is at the end of the day, we're instructors. Our main goal is to learn HEMA, teach HEMA, help others learn the beauty of stabbing someone in the face with a metal thing or throw them to the ground. Like, we are instructors. We are coaches. And while it does sometimes, whether we want it or not, the whole topic of diversity ends up falling on our shoulders based on the place that we are, we need to remind people that if they have a HEMA question, we are the kind of person that might be able to answer their questions, right? And this is really important. It's like, we need to take our responsibility as instructors to grow these things, but we also need to just be instructors and be coaches and talk HEMA. So I'm gonna go to a section which our goal is to talk HEMA. Things might still apply to us based on our reality and our circumstances or gender, but we're just gonna talk HEMA. And so the very first one, it actually got a good amount of requests for other people. And it's been a topic that has been appearing a lot lately, at least within my circles. So if you have never felt imposter syndrome, cover your screen. Thank you for making a point for me. So how do you deal with imposter syndrome? Everyone does it, and everyone thinks they're an alien because no one talks about it. So how do you deal with it?
Mine's very brief. First thing I do is I tell other people that's what I'm feeling. I've really had to work on being able to admit it. That's the tough part, but that's what I do so that they can then say, okay, I get that you're feeling that, but you don't have to because, and then let them list reasons. And then that feedback kind of calms me down. So that's I've learned to say, hey, I'm feeling this. Even if it's, I message my sister knows how much I love HEMA, and she knows that I'm a good instructor. I gave her a 5-minute lesson at her place once, and her kids love sword stuff because Auntie Lauren loves sword stuff. But so I'll message her if I have to, if I'm feeling it. I explain, I'm not feeling it. I'm feeling like I'm a fraud, and then she will remind me why I'm not.
So with people that I respect and that I need to work with, like my other coaches and instructors, I'll tell them that I feel like an imposter. But when I'm in the role of being an instructor, if I feel like I'm an imposter in front of a group of people, I find it comforting to think that I'm just like the smartest con man alive. Yes, I might be an imposter, but all of these people think that I'm not. So let me just play into the fact that they think I'm not an imposter. That way I can get them to respect me until they realize and just like hope that they never realize that I am an imposter. Just trying to play into it a little bit.
Yeah, reverse psychology, love that.
Yeah, sometimes you have to like trick yourself into doing something.
It's hard. It's so hard.
It is.
And like when I first started, when I like stepped out of the assistant instructor role, it felt wrong because like I hadn't been doing HEMA that long. I was a dancer before. Like I know the ballet terminology. My German is terrible. Like I literally in the middle of class, I will forget guards. I will forget positions. I will forget what this cut is called and what that cut is called. And I'm just like, I'm still learning too, you guys, but I have ways and opinions on how to do some of these that might help you, you know? So like, let's learn together, experiment with it. If you find a different way to do it, let's talk about it. Let's try it out. It's okay to admit that you're still learning. It's okay to admit that you don't know. The cool thing is you have the guts to stand in front of 20 people and demonstrate this stuff and learn how to be okay with looking dumb or having something not quite go to plan.
I would say not only is it okay, it is extremely important to be like, I'm still learning. Like, just like any good researcher, when new data comes up, you can change the way you do things. You can change what you think about stuff. It's incredibly important. And because of the whole translatory role that I have in the school, I try my level best to model that. So, you know, if I'm demonstrating something and then somebody says, well, how about if we do it this way? I'm like, great, let's see how it looks. Let's see what we can learn from it. And sometimes they'll show something that is clearly incorrect, but to break it apart and be like, oh, this is why we don't want to do this in this situation. But sometimes they're like, that's a stroke of genius. I never would have thought of that, but that's because I'm taller than you, or my arm isn't quite as long, or you're using a slightly different weapon. And these are great things to think about. Like it turns into a way of teaching how to think, and that's extraordinarily powerful. And that's something all of us can do. And we can do it sneaky or we can do it bold-faced. But that ties to another little bit of advice about imposter syndrome, which is if you're just faking it and you actually don't really know what you're doing, well, then you are an amazing faker. Like, you are top expert freaking faker. And that's a kind of expertise that is also very valuable. So own it.
Yeah,
and then parts of you will say, well, that's bullshit. I actually know what I'm saying. And you're like, I caught you. So it's a game you
Yeah, I always use the expression in my class when I'm particularly with beginners. I always say, look, fake it till you make it. And so I dive in with my imposter syndrome in two ways. One is fake it till you make it, and the other one, and I'm gonna break my own rule, the other way in which I deal with imposter syndrome is I'm gonna do it anyways. And so you will often talk things to me, and it happens a lot in tournaments to me, right, too. Or like when I'm about to teach, they're gonna be like, are you ready? And my answer is like, no, but I'm gonna do it anyways. And that is me having that feeling like, but like kind of like dive it in. So it's just kind of like flip table. It's like, just don't look back, just do it. And usually what happens is I get imposter syndrome, usually before the class starts. The halfway through the class, I start calming down. It's like, oh wait, I can actually kind of do this. Then at the end of the class, everyone is super excited. And at the end of the class, like, I'm a coach. I don't suck that much, right? And it just happens over and over again. And that's my way to deal with it. I just like head bunk first with it and just whatever flies and learn from that.
One thing I would also say from a very practical standpoint, and this is the marathoner talking, because my imposter syndrome tends to start with a lot of negative self-talk. When was the last time I drank anything or had food? Like, that is, like, I know it sounds stupid, but when I get going, I will forget to drink water or something like that. And then 2 hours later, I'm just so much negative self-talk. And I'm like, whoa, when did I have water last? And that doesn't mean that the detailed stuff goes away, because there's another level there. But just the immediate first question I ask myself is, do I just need water? And then, you can deal with the existential dread later, but you can at least shut up the negative voices for a little bit.
I like to make jokes.
Also,
There's been at least once where I was doing a cut and I was just like, oh man, the imposter syndrome's real today, everybody. And then just like, be like, so anyway, and then just sort of like circle back to what I'm doing. And then, or I'll just stop and be like, does any of what I'm saying make sense? Or am I just rambling at this point? And just being like upfront with like, checking in to make sure that my students are getting what they want out of it. And as long as they're getting what they want, I guess I'm doing okay.
I was going to say, the next thing that I want to go to, one of the times in which imposter syndrome tends to be the worst for many people is when they reach to a learning plateau. Like when you're learning and you feel you're getting great and you're improving, and then you feel like you just don't move out from there, right? And sometimes you are, but you just don't feel the improvement. So we're gonna do it again. Turn off your camera if you have never feel like you're stuck. It's part of the process. And there's actually things like usually the strongest rate of quitting for any sport is the first time that you feel that feeling of being stuck. That's when people like, it's like, oh, I'm useless, and they just throw it out of the window. So any sport, any martial art, everyone will have these feelings of getting stuck. And it's incredibly hard to get past them, especially for some people they get easier. Some people, they just keep getting harder and harder and harder because they will constantly happen. How do you deal with them, and how do you help people who are dealing with them?
Plateaus are a sign that you have learned a certain degree of information and you're now beginning to approach learning a more granular degree of information. Plateaus suck. They are infuriating. They will trigger every single emotional response that makes you feel lesser, like, why are you even here? Why am I even doing this? But you've got to remember that the plateaus only happen once you've started to really properly internalize a certain layer of understanding. So like for me, I've been going through a two-year plateau in learning destreza. Like I couldn't fight. I'd be trying to fence, and like my decision trees were non-existent. I'm like, let me just try this. Like everything was scattered, and the energy was sort of dispersed. And I had to sit with myself and be like, no, the reason this is happening is because you've internalized significantly enough all the basics. Like your footwork and distance are actually okay. The use of your sword when you're trying to subject other people, you're doing okay. It's now the finer applications against more seasoned opponents that's hard. And like, you've done all this work, you feel like you've made progress, but you're still hitting this wall of not being able to accomplish what you want to accomplish. That's because you're now trying to accomplish something more complex or more nuanced, and that's okay. So like teaching yourself that a plateau actually means that you've accomplished a significant level of learning, and now you might need to shake things up. You might need to change your approaches. You might need to start from scratch. Like, now that you've hit that approach, take the beginner class for a couple of weeks, see what happens. But the plateau ultimately is a good sign, and it's hard to convince yourself that that's the truth, but the plateau is actually a really good sign, as much as it makes to punch people in the face.
The important thing is maintaining a certain level of enthusiasm for the art, right? Because it's very easy to become defeated and lose all interest and then quit, right? So how do you stop that from happening? Change gears, take a break, right? Like maybe it is taking that beginner class and working on your foundations for X amount of time, but that doesn't work for everybody. Maybe it's, hey, I'm reading this really cool source. Do you want to work through some random stuff with me? Hey, so-and-so is getting in a harness. Let's work on some random cool harness stuff. Like grab a pole arm, let's go. Just completely disentangle, I guess, yourself from the thing that's giving you the most trouble. Maybe try a different weapon, because at least for me, there's some relatability with each weapon that exists with your main focus, right? So perhaps changing up the weapon system or changing up the weapon itself will allow you to focus on that motor skill or that block that is causing the plateau or contributing heavily to it.
The one time that I was about, like, there's one time that I can relate to that I was just about to wait. Like, I was done. And a friend texted me on Facebook. It was really random. Like, a friend texted me on Facebook, and it was like, I just don't feel inspired anymore. And it might not be an approach for everyone. I want to clarify that on the start. It's what made me stay in HEMA. So he was like, look, inspiration comes and goes. Discipline is what stays. So if you plan to keep doing HEMA just because you're feeling inspired right now, I'm going to tell you, as of now, you're not going to last. And that kind of like angered me and offended me. And I was like, oh, well, I can have discipline. And then from there, my next right after I came over that to fencing was just so much better now, because it had a different type of feeling to it. So it's a little bit of a more rude type of way, but like to me, that's one that it helped me personally. This kind of concept of like, if you want to see it as a martial art, you want to see it as a discipline, then you have to be disciplined. Even through these moments of this is not so much fun. But it's a very personal decision to make because it also makes it, there will be days in which there will be no fun and you need to make the question, is it worth it for me or is it not? To me, it was worth it. And to me, this approach was helpful. But I don't think that's the case for everyone, right? Like, I think there's many ways to like get to that point of moving forward. All right, so the next one, how do you get past sparring fear? Or how do you help someone get past their initial fencing fear?
I have one that I use if I'm feeling a bit nervous or something about sparring. There was a period of time where, for one reason or another, I was unable to for like a year. So when I got back into it, I was really nervous. But we have a thing that we call matrix speed. It's just named after the bullet scene in the Matrix where everything's slow. So like, cool, let's try and go really slow, but have good mechanics and keep it in the same timing. And then eventually you can be like, do we want to speed this up and bring it back that way? That way you're not quite as anxious. It allows you to feel like there's more control and kind of work things into that. So for me, that super helps me personally.
I count blows. I'd be like, look, I'll fight you for 5 exchanges or 2 exchanges or 3 exchanges. So I know there's an end to it. And then there's also the consent part of like, I want to go 50%. I want to go all the way in. I want to be super light, or like, let's go, but I'm not feeling great. So I might just randomly drop. So I kind of like set up like an agreement prior to my exchange. And that makes it much easier for me to go. And sometimes it's like, I'll do 3 exchanges, like 1, 2, 3, done. And then from there, it's easier to warm up.
I've done a thing. So if I am working with someone who's newer to sparring, so we'll do, Lauren, like you said, matrix speed, or we call it a half speed or slow speed sparring, where and if I'm doing it with someone or I'm watching 2 people do this slow speed, I'll have a stop and say, okay, let's rewind it. Okay, what else could you do from this position? Okay, what else could you do from this position? So we'll stop in the middle of it and not put like for senior members, and we do timed 3 minutes switch, 3 minutes switch. But for newer people, you don't want to give them that kind of pressure, or, oh, you have to go for 3 whole minutes. So we'll take it aside and we'll have them their own thing and stopping them. And so I'll do sparring with them at speeds, and all I'll do is defend. I want them to attack, and then I'll say, okay, what else could you do from this? And give them that confidence boost to say, you have options. Don't worry, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do. Okay, well, if you were sparring at full speed, maybe you'd have the pump, so we'll build you to that. And this gets them used to it and comfortable, and we're not using masks and gloves and jackets. We're not worried about armoring up. We're just going to say, what could you do? And then you see that, I could do this. Oh, and they get that excitement because, oh yeah, they remembered something. It is really cool. And then they go and they perform it. And it's like, yeah, exactly. And you're hitting it in the right spot, and you can give them that feedback, and that sort of builds their confidence. And then when it does come time to put on a mask, and maybe just a mask and gloves, and not go too fast, and just do a few number of hits, like you said, Mariana's like, okay, we're just going to do 3 exchanges and see how it goes. Then they're in that mindset. We've built them up to it. So we never just throw anyone into it for our group. They have to work their way up to it. So that's something that we're going to start doing for our new longsword students. One person will use a staff so that we can keep socially distant given what's going on, but we're going to start slow sparring. They're at that point, and we're going to ease them into it. And then this way they'll be excited because they'll have that experience of knowing that they can stop, pause, rewind, figure it out, and that'll increase their repertoire, so to speak.
Yeah, we do something also very similar, and also having different rings where you have different type of sparring. If you want to work on something specific, or if you want to just build into things on the drill, you can go in one, making it a little bit more of a game in a way, where we have just one variable that they have to play on. So therefore you're removing this pressures that you have to perform, and much more recentering the discussion of sparring into this is a learning tool, and discuss and talk with your partner to build on this learning tool.
Sorry, last one. We had 2 instances where it wasn't necessarily a fear of sparring. Like, they wanted to spar. They were so enthused about the idea. The problem was they were scared of hitting another person.
That's
They
a
were
big one.
very, yeah, super scared of hurting someone, right? Super scared of going too hard, too fast, messing something up, and something awful happening. So we had a different type of fear that we were working through, and a lot of it was working up to it, right? Like, are you comfortable hitting a Pell? Well, okay, let's talk about it. What's stopping you from hitting another person? Are you going to hurt them, or are you afraid of like long-term damage? Is it an impact that's jarring to you that's having you lock up? And they're both sparring now, but they do have days where they're like, I'm feeling those fears again. I'm gonna go work over here.
That actually is a good one, because I've seen that a lot. And one of the things that actually kind of worked for me, for my students to feel more willing to hit their opponent, is that I will tell them, like, you're gonna fence, you have to do this. If you hit them and you're worried, instead of saying I'm sorry, ask them, are you okay? Because that's the feedback that you need. So every time they're, are you okay? And they say, yeah, they're fine. And you're like, instead of saying sorry, it keeps you with the guilt. And that concept of saying, like, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? And sometimes they will say, like, no, that's a little rough, but it gives them that measure tool. So then they feel more confident. It's like, oh, so every time that I do this, I'm not hurting you, so now I'm willing to do that. So that's a very good one, of the fear of attacking. Which leads me to the next question, which I actually am super excited about. And this is all for you as instructors, to you, what makes a great HEMA student? What are the qualities that make a student great? Or like that you're like, yes, everyone should do these things.
Persistence and dedication for me. Like, one of my favorites was a girl that came to one of my Give a Girl a Sword days, and she was probably like the one that I thought would never come back. Like, she looked so horribly awkward, and she didn't really talk to anybody, but she showed up to class, and she kept showing up, and she's gotten better, and she's sparring now, and she's got her own gear, and it's just really amazing to see that kind of progression. And so that's what I like in my students, is having the persistence to keep coming to class and the dedication to keep at it and get better from wherever they started from.
Just a willingness to not know, but to like learn. Just willing to say, I don't know, but I would like I would like to know. Yeah.
Somebody that asks questions and voices maybe not necessarily exactly what they're feeling, because there's always, at least for me, a lot of room for figuring out how I'm feeling with something, but is always very communicative in what they need and how to best, whether or not they see a way forward. They just, this isn't really working, or, I'm having this problem. Somebody who's comfortable with that, or is willing to build up to be comfortable. Somebody that's engaged and curious.
Yeah, mine was very similar. I was saying about how communication for me is super important. I always try and ask how they feel about things and try and create a space so that way eventually they can initiate the conversation if they feel like something's not working, or if it's awkward, or if they need it explained another way, especially. Because obviously everybody has different needs and learns in different ways. I've had students who've had previous martial arts experience, or dancers, or nothing, and a lot of them learn in different ways. Some people prefer to mirror you or stand behind you, or just use a different phrasing. So allowing them to have that space, making sure that they can feel comfortable talking to you. So for me, the more willing they are to let me know how they're feeling, what they're doing, if they're struggling, how they're doing that day, everything, like the more that we can talk with them and they can talk back, I feel like that really makes a good student. And I think that's fantastic, because I feel like we can foster that ourselves by initiating to start with and hoping that they'll kind of take that on and build that connection and rapport to be able to talk back, and we can create our own students to have that communication.
I love the students who don't mind making mistakes. They like when they're confident on their mistakes and they're kind of like experimental and trying things, because it makes everyone around them be more okay with it. It's like, they're just like, oh, I couldn't get it. All right, let me try it again. And they're a little bit like more willing to make the mistake, and they kind of like embrace it loudly. Like I really like when students are kind of like a sheer of positivity. I cannot say to that. To all the other students, because of course I'm a coach, I'm going to be positive, but it's cool when there's a peer that has that kind of like energy and it contagious. Those, they always are really helpful, particularly when you have very shy students, because they help them bring them out of their cocoon. And I also love when they research on their own and they come with like a little bit of extra. We have these students that we were working with these manual, and the translation of Ayla was kind of like wonky, and she's been doing HEMA for less than a year, and we were talking on Facebook on the chat, and she like all of a sudden start talking with me and my husband is like, I have a theory about how these plays, and she just figured something that we've been struggling for a long time now. It's like that kind of curiosity is like, yes, please, thank you. Like it's I don't know, it makes it kind of like, it makes you want to learn more and research more and be ready for them, right? It's like, oh no, they're gonna make me like you say, like they're gonna make questions. I need to be better. Kind of like they challenged you to do more with yourself. I really like that. All right, so I guess I'm gonna go to the next one. All right, we're gonna go to the next question. Do you coach competitive students and casual students differently? Yes, no, why?
Yes, because their goals are different. You know, the goals of each student should be discussed and reviewed relatively frequently, because if you're teaching to goals that are no longer what's being kept in mind, that leads to plateaus, and that leads to frustration. So it's good to just sort of check in with the student, be like, all right, so what are you looking to do with what you're learning right now? And non-competitive students might suddenly be like, you know, I'm doing really well in sparring during combat time. I think I'd like to maybe enter a tournament. Like our school specifically run a tournament in October that's meant to be beginner friendly, so that, like, you know, if you've never done a tournament before, this is the one that you come in and do, so that you've got support to show you the faux ways of what an Australian tournament is like. So if I have somebody who wants to be competitive, chances are I will possibly hand off to somebody else, because I'm not that, like, I can do it, but it's not my strength. But if somebody's like, I want to get into the nitty gritty about things, I want to really get into the theory, and I want to crack into all of this, you know, granular stuff, then I can absolutely help them. But they're different. And the motivations behind those goals are different, and that needs to be respected and taken into account.
I would say even their like motive for wanting to get into the tournament scene. Like I've had relatively casual students express an interest too, and I'm like, well, what's your goal with doing the tournament? And it varies from, I feel like I should because everybody else does. I feel like I should because it'll gain me credibility in the club. Or I feel like I should because I just want to fight different people and see where I am, you know, like all valid, right? Even your competitive guys that are like, HEMA ratings are it, you know, let's talk about it, you know, like, is that really all there is? Or are you trying to really gain something from it? Because you know, having an internal motivator beyond just a score is beneficial too. It helps give you a focus and a goal while you're pursuing this.
I guess it's interesting because I don't teach them differently, but I will lean them forward in a different way. So when I teach my class, I will focus in very tactical stuff, because to me, and many people consider tactical stuff to be a thing that is just pertains to competitive fencers, right? But to me, it involves on the understanding of the sources, right? It involves on the understanding of the technique. So I will kind of like give everyone the same base, like everyone will have the same crust to their pizza, because it's a topic on time. And then from there, I will push you differently. So if you're more into the research part, I will push you more towards how do you take these texts that we haven't worked with, try to work with it and make it fit within these tactics that we've learned to, or like, how do you work with that? Or like from here, how do I push you to make it even more explosive, more adrenaline-y if you're more on the competitive side? Or if you just want to have fun, how you make it more for like how to keep working on this in a chill way that is not stressful, that stops making it fun for you. So like to me the base is the same, but at the end of it I will push you towards different lines. But I don't know, that's kind of like my approach for it, which is why I thought this question was interesting, because I'm curious to see how other people deal with it. I guess this is also why I like to say different coaches or different instructors, different styles, right?
I think what you just said is important, where I think if you have different instructors that also have different focuses, then that also kind of lends to the diversity of like how like each person kind of manifests of like, well, this is my type of training and how I engage in HEMA. And sometimes that's more the historical interpretations or the mechanics or the competitive things. And I think by having different instructors that like all have like a different flair, because like some of us are definitely like I've started this late in life and like I really didn't compete for any type of sports, and so it's like I'm getting like a late flavor of it, and it's like I want to do these things which might be different than other instructors. It's like, yeah, we've done this for years, this is an old hat, this is the place that I'm at right now. So I think if you see kind of like the variety of like how different instructors interpret it while still being open that their students are also going to have different variations of where they want to go with their competition, and sometimes maybe matching an instructor that will have more of a focus towards, okay, you seem like you want to do the competitive thing, let's kind of like put you with someone who can help you get there, that you're both flowing together.
And it's funny because we always talk about casual fencers or more like scholar fencers leaning toward the competitive, but we always fail to address the very competitive fencers who then turn into a more scholar perspective, more casual perspective, in which like, this has given me as much as it could, right? Maybe I just wanted to understand adrenaline, I want to understand these things. Now that I get that, let me go back and just deep down into like all the techniques that I cannot. My favorite techniques are the ones that you cannot do in a tournament. Like I like the school bashing cross guard on your eye type of like, right? Gives me joy in a terrible way. And just I guess we also have to acknowledge that kind of like that shift goes both ways. Like casual fencers will turn competitive and competitive fencers will turn to casual, and have like some will be more scholarly, some others will be less, and that there's not like a fixed position for each student, and kind of like give them that capability of grow, I guess.
We create spaces for our guys to explore that too. Like our in-house events, we have little fight nights, so the casual guys can experience what it is to be in a tournament, to have something scored, so they experience the adrenaline rush that is not knowing what the other person's going to do. And then we'll have, bigger in-house tournaments where we have people from, as far as Pennsylvania, or people that are willing to like drive down and see like the historical bring-in league that Julie was able to make this year. It was pretty cool. It's just different events for different folks so they can experience and explore.
So that's good. So the next one, training and teaching is not the same as coaching, right? Coaching is when your person is in fight, whether you're coaching them in class as a way to like help them see differently, or you're coaching them in a tournament, like competitive stress environment. What do you do to make coaching efficiently? What makes coaching efficiently? Do you have to know the person to be able to coach them the best? Do you have to work with the coach? Like, what is it that makes, or how do you make sure that you coach in an efficient way? Or what is it that you do different? Like, I want to explore the coaching type of.
When I'm coaching somebody, I'm very careful not to overload them with corrections, especially when they're in a fight. Like I'll see one to exchange, and when they back up, I'll be like, okay, this is something I saw, and I will try to not make it like any groundbreaking. Like your guard could be a little higher. Is about like I don't want to like try to force them to fight in a way that they don't feel comfortable fighting. I just want to give like tiny little corrections and set them like set them up for success. Like if I see anything that's like say their guard is super low, maybe try bringing that up, or mind your distance, because I have been as a fighter entirely overloaded by a coach, and it's like, all right, well, this is wrong, and then I go to do an exchange, like, wait, and then in that like wait, it was just a zvert right to the side of the head, which was embarrassing, but I learned from that.
I think the idea that
better.
the idea that coaching cannot hurt your fighting, it's a complete myth. Like a bad coach will make it or break it, I think.
Yeah,
I've been that bad coach before.
Don't we all?
Dude, it sucks.
So, for example, my partner is an excellent trainer. I mean, he trains very well. He fights very well. but I know he is this efficient to provide the information I need during a fight. I need just like, don't overwhelm me with information. Just tell me to focus on that one thing, like next trust setting, and you just focus on that where you want them to go. Those are the things I do more.
Other thoughts?
Ask your person.
That's what I was gonna say. Have the conversation with them like if you can, have the conversation with them before their pools or like their thing starts, so that it's more comfortable. Like get them, if they can, to communicate what they need first, so you're not imposing it upon them. And then from there, ask suggestions, kind of like get feedback, like, or do you need me to like succinctly give you a keyword that will trigger if I say like, you know, like line that you're getting close to like the edge of a ring out and you need to make sure you stay close, like making sure like you are available to do like very key succinct things to make it so there's not brain processing. And also not even just words, but like, does somebody want you to be encouraging? Does somebody want you to be serious? Does like the mood that you portray, the actions, the body language, that also plays a role. So making sure you're both on the same page with that, because I could be like super like, yeah, good job, and that helps one person, and then I do that with someone else and you're like, you're distracting me, I need to be here, and it's like, okay, we're on the same page. So all of those elements, if you can, talk to them before they compete, so that it's fleshed out. You know, ask for like for confirmation, like, I'm going to repeat back to you, here are the things you want, is that correct? Have them say yes or no.
I think that's why it's important, like people don't sometimes realize that, like on the ideal world, training with your coach on how to coach each other is like ideal. Like I like to have my students like learning how to coach each other, because teaching someone in the spot to coach you, it's helpful, but it's not necessarily that great. Because I just say like every person has different needs in coachings, and for example, depending on my mood is how it changed. So I always told my coaches at first is like, you need to yell at me like you hate me, because when people tell me like distance, my brain goes like, oh, is that a suggestion? Should I do it? Let me, and then I get hit. But if I'm fencing and my coach yells like distance, I'm like, and I do the thing, like I respond to that trigger, right? But if I'm doing good, then I need to be leveled down. And one of the things that worked for me, like one of the best coachings I've ever had, I was doing great, but I needed to kind of like keep it cool. So my coach came to me and I was like, hey, I just came here to talk to you because your opponent is getting nervous because they think that I'm giving you advice, but you're doing fantastic. I just want them to be nervous. And that made me feel so good. And it made my opponent nervous. So I think it's that conversation of what works for you is super good. And I also think that people need to try different coaching, because maybe I used to think that certain things worked for me, and then I realized that they were actually not really there, right? And for example, my husband, when I coach him, he needs water, time, and if he's missing something really obvious. So I have to kind of like be like, you're doing good, kind of like cool him down, give him water, be like, you have plenty of time, yell at him when he has 1 minute left, and he's attacking you on the head over and over again. Anything other than that will completely throw his fencing off. The thing that's kind of like interesting is like understanding that no one has the same response to the same coaching all the time.
Something that we used to do to prepare for gymnastics tournaments that might be something is rehearsing of that, and is learning that in a controlled environment. I think we don't do enough of them in HEMA, where we actually have an experience in some situation that we can control, where maybe it's something in sparring and you're having both of you have coaches, because like you said, that can throw you off that somebody else is getting told something and you don't know what it is. And that, like, a way of dealing with that could be figured out at that moment. You can sort of test different sort of waters and fight different types of people and realize what you need situationally, and have a real time of like actually trying that out. We used to do that with gymnastics, and it was like preparation for how you went on the floor, preparation for like, you know, I used to like being told when there was 5 people to go, and then I would go and do my own thing, and then at 3 people to go, they'd tell me again. And then when I was ready to go, I didn't like to be told anything specific about my routine. Like I wouldn't, like loads of people would come in and they'd be like, right, okay, you need to remember to do this, you need to look for the ball on this, you need to point your feet on this, you need to really pull up, and I would just get overwhelmed that it wouldn't work. I needed somebody to come and talk to me about like something like we were having for dinner that night or something like that, because I needed to calm down and talk about anything except that thing. and that's what worked best for me. But we knew that through like a lot of trial and error stuff, where it wasn't a big deal if I messed up because it was in club, and it's less pressure there.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, like, when you're not even into tournaments, right? To me, sometimes the fact that I have a coach to remind me if I'm getting too close, it makes me, there's one less thing for me to get worried about, right? So it allows me to think on other things itself. And it eventually kind of like builds off, in which I don't need to have that reminder anymore. But while in training, not in tournaments, but like if in training, someone else is in charge of reminding me that, I don't know, I'm running off too much, because I will do that. I no longer have to think of it, so I can do other things. And it kind of like warms me up to try different and new things. So I think I like that.
You've added it as a drilling component.
I really like reminding people to breathe, because that's something that is huge, and it's been brought up a couple of times at tournaments that I've been at, where people are, they get really, really worked up and they stop breathing, and then they start to, like, everything starts to get really scary because they're not getting enough oxygen. And especially when you have a mask in front of your face, like, sometimes you just need to, like, stop, take a couple of really big, like, breaths, and then it's just like, all right, cool. That's forcing a lot of this adrenaline response and, like, the twitchy panickiness out. It's something that's helped me a lot going for morning walks with a mask on my face.
Are you talking about tactical breathing?
I was not, or I mean, I might be. I've never heard of tactical breathing before. I've just, like, I like to remind people to breathe both when they're fighting and, in between bouts, and so they don't, like, go into a fight and immediately start holding their breath until, like, the fight's over.
Like that stage breathing in through your nose, out through your mouth, and you have a count to it. Something else to focus on and ground yourself with.
And that leads me to the next question. Do you approach sparring differently when you're trying to make, like, a particular, like, technique kick in, as in when you spar in order to perform? Like, do you see them differently?
We do, and it's actually written into the way that we structure our school and our classes. We have 2 degrees, well, we have 3 degrees of sparring. We've got what we call scholar's privilege, which you perform with just eye protection and a sword, and you deliberately go very slowly with very little impact. And the idea is you're trying to execute some of the techniques that you've just learned in an environment where your partner is cooperative and uncooperative at the same time. And then once you're safe doing that, you're allowed to go into masked combat, which is where you put on a gorget and a mask, and now face can be a target. Because when you do scholar's privilege, you cannot target the face. But once you have the mask and the gorget on, you can go a little bit faster and you can target the face. And again, the whole principle is you are in combat against someone, and you can ask them, you can say, you know what, I really want to work on my cuts. Can you give me opportunities that would trigger cuts for me? And the other person will be like, great, but when we're done, can we switch roles? And I want to practice my atajos. And then once you actually get your jacket on and everything, you can say, you can either say, I want to practice these techniques under strong pressure, like I want, like, fight me. Or you can say, I'm not so much worried about my techniques, I just want to get used to fighting under pressure. I want to get used to fighting in these kind of conditions. So yes, there's an absolute difference. And while there's a unifying theme of combat against an uncooperative, a safe and helpful but uncooperative opponent, there are different degrees of that, and they achieve different things.
I'd also argue that there are different levels of sparring. There's sparring in a drilling sense, and then there's free sparring. So what I've started, because everyone's like, I want to learn how to do this faster, right? Like, I feel like Indes is such a thing, like in Fulin are things we talk about, but things that are really hard to experience in a controlled setting. So I've been messing with introducing sparring as a drill, where I'll add limiters, right? So if we're working on, I did it by the seat of my pants. I, like, didn't have a lesson plan, and I was like, oh, knock Ryzen, we're doing it, right? Chasing after. Happens all the time, and it's one of those things you can't really teach, right? You need your peeps to observe it first, right? Like, it's something they have to experience for themselves, a timing they have to get. So that was it, right? Like, I told him what it was. We messed with it. We did some very clear, like, slow sparring incidences where it was very clear when to chase after, right? When the pause was. And then I was like, cool, slow sparring, pick a person. And because our classes were so big and our space was limited, I only had half the class spar at a time. And I pulled the other people aside, which is kind of harkening back to the coaching scenario where you learn by watching, right? So they still got to see knock Ryzen, they still got to learn it, but they had to only do knock Ryzen with a thrust, knock Ryzen with offsets, and knock Ryzen with a cut, knock Ryzen with a closing in. And I put those parameters on, so those are the only techniques they could do. And then after class, they could do whatever they wanted.
And this tied into the other question that was that I have here, which is, how do you, like, if someone wants to add a particular technique, right? Like, I want to move like Paul Sector Mayor, and I want to do these move. How do I make sure that I can include that to my repertoire? How can I actually perform that? So, for example, what works for me is that I will make like a small drill. Like, I feint to the right, I do the action that I want to do, like, let's say the threat coming from whatever, and then parry push. And I will do that over and over again, right? So I will learn this kind of like setup. And then what I will do is I will work through my free fencing in a way in which I invite my opponent to do that action that will lead me to that setup, that will lead me to do that technique, that particular technique, right? So I will either do that, or I will do what you're saying, which I will do games in which you do control sparring, in which, like, you're fencing with a goal. You can do whatever, but this is your ultimate goal, or this is the limits that you have to these fencing times, so you can do everything but these, and this, so it forces you to try these other things. That's how I would do it, but, like, how do you advise, or how do you train so you can incorporate these very particular actions from a manual into your fencing in a successful way?
I like to do we call them like box drills. I don't know if they're actually technically box drills, but I'll pair people up and I'll have assigned specific roles. Like, the example I'm going to use is working like good, strong structural parries into people's fencing. And so one person can attack, and they can only do, long edge cuts. And this is the order they're going to do them in. And the other person can only parry those cuts. And then as soon as that drill, like, everyone's comfortable doing that, and they, all right, I know the next cut's coming from here, then I open it up. So it's like, okay, same cuts and same parries, but the attacker can, set the order of these cuts. And then it's like, all right, now defender, what I want you to, like, notice, don't do anything with it yet, but I want you to notice where your opponent is open after you've done that parry. And then it's like, okay, now if you see an opening, the defender can go on the offense, and then the roles just flip, and then you slowly build up to that. And then the students are, wow, my brain just made like a Windows shutdown noise there. The students kind of wind up in a very controlled, restricted sort of sparring environment where either one of them can safely take control of, who's attacking and who's defending, in a very, very controlled setting. And you can do that with really any of the, my background is KDF, so any of the 5 strikes. You can do that with, it works really well with any kind of basic Oberhau and Zwerkau. And you actually notice that the Zornhau comes out when the person is like, all right, now I want to take over, and I'm going to, like, I see my opening, I'm going to, strike this way. And then you see that sort of evolve.
I guess, I mean, that's a great, I love it, and I do very similar, but me as an individual, right, outside of class, I found these moves, I want to incorporate it into my fencing. I want it to happen as I fence. How do I make that happen? Type of thing.
I think it's so important to have these conversations with your person before you start fighting, right? Before you start sparring. What technique? So, like, I was working on my wines recently, as in like months ago now. But right? So like I was like struggling with how to transition it into a wind. And I knew that this, like, it's a complex move. It's a complex, I don't know, feed setup that I needed. So I knew that I couldn't pick just any random person to work on this with. I had to work with a fellow instructor in order to do this. But we talked about it, and, you know, we free sparred at first to find that prime entry point, I guess, based on how I already fenced. So we could incorporate that movement, right? Just because I'm not in the beginning engraving starting position doesn't mean that I'm doing it wrong. It means that I have to either get there or transition into that position in order for it to be right. What we're seeing are just snapshots. So how do we translate those snapshots into movements? And a lot of it is, you know, experimenting and trusting the person that you're working with to provide you that feedback, that stimulus, in order for you to build that response. And if they're not able to do it, you know, table it, talk to them about it, be like, well, who else is really good at doing this? You know, who else can I try? Who else would you recommend?
So this is also, as in, particularly because right now a lot of people are doing like their own garden fencing, and they're kind of like on their own. The question, and just think at it like this, a question that comes from your student: how do you train? Like, how do you pick your goals? How do you set which goals you're going to do? How do you build off a training? Because people are like, I want to train, and they're like clueless about what to do from there. So how do you plan your training? How do you set goals for yourself? How do you know which goals are smart to take, right? What's rational? Like, how do you do that? I want to learn how to do better cutting, right? Like, I want my cuts to be better, but they don't know how to set up goals for that. Like, what does that, like, I want to be better at my cuts.
So I think that there are some people that know exactly what they want to be working on. And once they know what they want to be working on, it's actually getting a little bit easier. But for the people who are like, I know I have everything to be working on, what do I start with? That's where you get more some of the issue, I think. So I know at my club what we have is, yes, well, footwork, always footwork. Footwork is amazing. But what we do is that we have every month, someone in our club will do a video on the 20-minute challenge, and it's very much like what you can be working on this time and this month. So you get kind of like a little routine where you can focus on something, and then next month you will get something else. But you can always also have the discussion with someone else. I know that a lot of people say, well, I want to know how to break your guard, then we'll be working on that. I think it's if they know what they want to be working on, there is no question. The issue is much more when you don't know what you should be starting with, and yes, footwork.
Yeah, because I think that's the struggle for many, is like they just want suggestions on how do I solo train.
For me, a lot of my focus has been on mechanics, because I know if my mechanics are solid, then that'll help my technique, which will make the actual like techniques themselves easier. And it's a very easy thing to like plan. It's like, all right, we're doing footwork. I have worked footwork into anytime I'm walking in the city, anytime I'm walking in a crowd, when I'm walking around my house. I look for little tiny opportunities where I can squeeze in, you know, doing a lunge or a passing step or a gathered step or something like that, just as often as I can. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to take it to the like, yeah, I'm gonna just do fencing footwork to move through a crowd. You don't have to go to that like crazy extreme, but
that's a great image in my brain though.
It's so much fun to do, especially if you don't really have a goal. Sometimes it's nice to just do, it's like, all right, today I'm going to do, you know, 5 cuts from each line, and then I'm going to go do some footwork. And then, you know, the next day I really don't feel like doing either of those, so I'm just going to read a source, or I'm going to watch videos of other people fighting as sort of like research. Is to just, if you don't know what you're going to do, I think it's a good thing to diversify.
Just for when we're talking about goals that we do know that what we want, so if we want to improve our cuts or something like that, like I always kind of follow the whole SMART goal thing, and this comes from like gymnastics wise, where they've got to be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time based. And like for me, that's really helpful because I don't feel like it's something that's just kind of, oh, I want to do this thing, and then you just sit there and not do anything about it, because you've added the time thing, you've made it relevant, it aligns with what you've got to what you've got in your life, you've made it measurable so that you don't feel like you've got that plateau. And from earlier on when we were talking about that plateau, like I think that doing that for me has helped when I've felt like I've been on that plateau myself, and I've been able to go, okay, so let's identify something I want to work on, and that makes me feel like I've come out of it a little bit. So that's something that like has helped me, especially during all the COVID stuff and I've been stuck in my garden in the rain.
I'm a huge fan of SMART, so I'm so happy that you put it out there. All right, so we literally have 2 things left. So the very last question for this section, and then the other one might not happen depending on how the conversation went. If you recommend other trainings or other activities outside of HEMA, which activities would you recommend?
Dancing.
I'd recommend Pilates.
Dancing.
Core strength, yeah, dancing, Pilates, things that emphasize core strength, balance, and like with dancing, you're in distance. Boxing too.
And timing, yeah. Yoga's been kind of cool too. So during COVID, we've been doing a lot of weird video exploration things where like I was leading ballet classes, I was leading a modern class, and then we had another member who was certified yoga. So she came in and she was doing yoga classes. And we were just like, how do we translate this into fencing? And everyone's like, yo, these are muscles that I never knew existed. These are muscles I never even considered. These are movements that I didn't even know I could do. Like, just cross-training is so important for learning your body, too.
Yes.
And I think that's, like, body fluidity and body knowledge are, like, some of the coolest things that you can hone and learn while fencing.
I really like bouldering.
Yeah, I was going to go. I usually suggest 2, which will be weightlifting. And for those, if you don't want to do much, powerlifting does. Those are like great because of all the core. And then I will definitely voice the yoga too, because while I don't get along with it, I know that it gives you consciousness of every single part of your body. And it's really hard to explain the other person's like, this is the muscles that I need you to activate when they don't even know where they are or how do they feel when they're activated. That is like super tough. And when you have someone who understands their body, things just progress so much faster. So like, and lifting will give you that one too, based on next day soreness. Like after you do your first bench press and the next day is like, oh, what are that? What are those? And how do I
don't know
move
what
them
they are, but everything hurts.
Yes.
So Lauren and Jess, you do pole, and Lauren, you do aerials. Is that right? Do you find that those contribute?
I've actually put on more muscle from aerials than I ever have from swords, so it's always hilarious. I've been doing HEMA stuff for about 6 years, but only been doing aerials for about 3 now. So it's really funny because we used to use me as like the poster girl for you don't need muscles to be able to do it. And now it's kind of harder to convince people because now I'm starting to build muscle to be like, no, I swear, you still don't need a ton of muscle. A lot of my aerial stuff does include dance there, and I honestly find that having an awareness around that definitely helps footwork, like full stop. I think dance just helps footwork, having an awareness of your feet, where they are at all times. And I think with aerials, just not only building muscle, but just understanding the space that you occupy around you, what you are and aren't capable of, like with your body, and just knowing how to check in with, you know, how far can I lunge and stuff. And that's kind of the stuff you usually find out while warming up to do aerials. So yeah, it's definitely helped.
I think another thing is like dance is huge, and I think that's probably one of the reasons like starting this so late in life and being like out of shape going into HEMA. If I had my dance background, I don't think I would have had the balance or the footwork to support it. But I think another thing is like tapping into other types of martial arts. Because I know before I did this, I did Kung Fu for a few years. I did Tai Chi for a couple of years. And a lot of that worked on things that you may not necessarily think about, like grounding and centering yourself, which comes in really well for things like ring-in. Or, in HEMA, like when we do historical fencing, we don't necessarily work with a lot of like lower body mechanics that are involving like kicks and stuff, because that's not usually allowed in the sources. But a lot of the generation of like how you're using your lower body to generate power also gives you a sense of like, how do you utilize that throughout your muscle core and everything. So I find that dabbling in other martial arts also can be like a help towards like, how do I take those mechanics and apply them to what I do in fencing.
I was going to say, like, Victoria, with your gymnastics background, I feel like if there's someone who knows how to move each muscle of their body, you're on that list, because the control is just, like, amazing.
Yeah. And then while you're also upside down and you've got a pair of clubs in the air above you, you're like, what's happening? Yeah.
Follow-up question. So with the gymnastics, the pull and the aerials, do you find your flexibility helping or hindering you?
Helping.
Training.
I'm at the extreme of flexibility, so for me it's not very fun. Like on saber and broadsword with your one arm, I'll give you guys an actual look at how far this arm bends, and you're gonna agree with me afterwards. So this is a normal human arm.
Yeah, you're
That's how
super
far
good.
mine bends. That is not fun, and finding somebody that can deal with that is just very difficult. But being aware that you do that means that when you walk into a class and you see somebody with like a tiny amount of that, you're immediately like, oh, I can help you. I know what this is. And for a lot of women, and especially, they have a little bit more hypermobility than men. And I think it's quite useful to have somebody that understands that in the class. But I feel like it does hinder me to a point. It's also like, it also takes a little bit longer for somebody that's really flexible to build up the same amount of strength and the same amount of like core stability and everything as somebody that's not. But having that actually helps me as a coach. So
yeah, I'll also agree.
I like that one.
There's still some hypermobility from the dancing that exists. I danced for like 10 years, and there's just like random things where I'm like, like, yeah, the hyper flexibility in the knees, like my ankles roll constantly, like in ringing, I'll just like randomly fall into the splits because I lock out. Like just knowing that your body does this and like where those weaknesses are, super important. And everyone's like, oh, it's so cool that you're flexible. And I'm like, until it's not.
I think it's a balance, because I used to do cheerleading, and I was the girl flying on the sky. I didn't do it for that long, but I did it for long enough. And like, I stopped doing it because I got like a really, really bad knee injury. And it's funny because there's certain levels of, there's places in my fencing in which I wish I had more flexibility back, right? And when it does, improves, but there's places in which it's too much. So I think it's just a matter of balance. Like, you do want flexibility, but you also want to have it kind of like in a certain, just like any activity you do will have a different level of requirements. All right, so we go to the last question. And this is also really cheesy, but I really wanted to do it. What advice do you wish you were given when you started your road as an instructor? And if you started as an instructor in something that is not HEMA and still applies, go for it. But I think that's one that I'm really interested on hearing.
Don't be afraid to say you don't know something and get back to them.
Be willing to take an I don't know and turn it into a learning moment by bringing everybody in to experiment and try approaches to the question.
Don't be someone that you're not. Don't try to be fake. Don't try to, I'm a super instructor, maestro. Just be yourself. Be yourself and be honest, because that's what keeps people coming back rather than being intimidating and being fake.
They're there because they want to learn from you, because otherwise they wouldn't be there.
There's nothing wrong with lesson planning and rehearsing those lesson plans before you decide to deliver them. It's also okay to improvise on the spot. It's okay to redirect depending on how the class is performing and how the class is changing as you're delivering that lesson.
You are allowed to make mistakes as you're teaching and correct yourself in front of everybody, because in fact you're teaching them that making mistakes is normal and it's important.
Laugh.
Laugh.
Learn to laugh.
Laughter is good.
I point out other experts too. Like if I'm not particularly good at a technique that I'm attempting to demonstrate, like I can understand the theory of it all day and talk about it, but if I can't demo it, then it's not going to help those that learn by demoing. So I'll, make sure I have those experts in class with me so I can call on them and have them demonstrate. That way everybody's learning, everybody's building.
I think it's okay to like show both your weaknesses and your strengths. It's like, and be able to demonstrate that to your students. So it's like, okay, I'm not from year, like we're not doing this very long, I'm not going to have the historical references down, but my strength may be that I may be more approachable to asking questions and having an open dialogue. So making sure like everyone like is knowledgeable of that and can work together with that. So I think having it's okay that you're not going to be good at all of the things, but to make sure that you really highlight the things that you are good at.
Oh, here's the other one. Things will go wrong sometimes, and you just have to deal with it. And for these one, I'm going to go to a personal story because it really hurts me, but it really taught me a lot in my journey through learning inclusive language, right? I have hard time in English naturally. I changed he, she out of just speaking a different language. And they has been really challenging to me. My option for that is actually learn names rather than try to go for the he, she, they, and just address the person by name. But like in my process, I was constantly switching someone's pronouns, and I was trying to figure it out for the first time in my life how I ask pronouns, and I did everything wrong. And I just think I have to accept that that's part of the process, and that everyone this time was pronounced, right? Sometimes it's about how you're teaching fencing. Like, you will make mistakes, and sometimes it will go wrong, but it will happen. If it hasn't happened yet, it will happen. Just have to deal with it, right? I think that's one that I wish they had told, because he just threw me to the ground for like months. And if someone had told me that it was going to happen eventually, it would have been more of a learning tool rather than a throw you down to the ground type of tool.
I think in that case too, it's good to assume the responsibility of the mistake and make sure that you touch base with that person afterwards and recognize that you did an oopsie and you feel terrible about it, right? And it's not that you were attempting to misidentify, you just messed up. And sometimes it happens too where you make a mistake and then all of a sudden your brain's like, don't say that, and then all you can do is say that. Brain, please
share the load. Don't take it all, because that's me. I'll just take it all on, do every single thing. I would like to tell myself it's okay to delegate. It's okay to ask your co-instructor to work on something. It's okay to get someone else to order the new club t-shirts, even though that's not specifically for class instructing, but it's okay to get other people to do their thing. You don't have to do it all. And that's probably the biggest advice that I'd give myself. You don't have to do it all.
I was talking to Kiana yesterday, and unfortunately she couldn't make it today. She had another commitment, but she gave me this little piece of advice that I think is and I'm just going to read it verbatim because I think it's so important for us all to. It always takes a village. Give yourself credit where credit is due. Our community is better for the work that all of us are doing. You're also giving others a community where they feel safe and recognized, and that's what matters the most.
On that note, something that is kind of going back to where we started, my current partner, when she first came to see a fencing class, she was a little intimidated by as soon as we got to the fighting, and she thought it was both hysterical and so heartwarming that after every fight, everybody just immediately like hugged and was like, yo, that was awesome. But like that kind of, don't be afraid to be really, not overly, but like, don't be afraid to be affectionate with, your coworkers, your friends, your colleagues. At the end of the day, the thing that's going to create the most welcoming environment is, showing everybody that like we do this really intense, violent thing, but at the end of the day, we're going to like hug each other and then go out and get a whole bunch of food afterwards.
One advice that I would like to have heard is ask other coaches. They have walked the walk. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? Ask someone else because they might have the answer. And if they don't, then investigate, figure it out, come up with something. But honestly, contact other coaches, because being alone on that process is like, why do you have to re-struggle with this if there's like thousands and thousands and thousands of coaches who have that answer? And you can also approach coaches that are not HEMA, because a lot of issues have to do more with how do you approach the things rather than the topic itself. So you can learn from other people, not just from your HEMA fellows, and bring things from outside towards what you do.
To tie in with that, networking is huge. I mean, for some of us, like, again, like for myself, I've only done this for a couple of years. And I think one of the ways that I've been able to learn as much as I have is like, go to more tournaments, go introduce myself to people, as scary as that is, like have conversations, make sure you're engaging, and like there's giggles between matches, there's hugs afterwards, consensually, of course. Like the ability for all of us to be like we're not just one person, we have this, like all these resources, and reaching out and making those connections makes it easier for us to all build each other as instructors, as coaches, as fencers.
And people are actually quite happy to talk to you. People are delighted to talk to you.
I was just thinking that this is something we love. This is something we're all very passionate about. Like, please, for the love of God, give us like an opportunity to talk about it. That isn't family dinner at Thanksgiving again. Teaching evolved over the years.
Yeah, I like that one. All right, so thank you so much, everyone, for being a part of the first Instructor Symposium. That it was supposed to last an hour and lasted 3 whole beautiful hours of talking. We might actually do this again because I absolutely loved it. Thank you for everyone for making a time within your time zones. And honestly, it was a privilege, truly a privilege and an honor to get to share a piece of knowledge and a piece of your experience. Because at the end of the day, what makes us better is not just our experiences, is the shared experiences. We all come from different places, gives us different perspectives. And this is, in my opinion, what makes HEMA great, what makes HEMA grow, and what makes us go to where it's good. Because there's a lot of drama in the internet, but at the end of the day, these conversations are what actually build HEMA. This is real HEMA for people who are new to this. This is what makes things happen. And I'm really, really, really thankful for all of you showing up and for giving these symposium a chance and for allowing all of these to be a thing. So thank you.
And thank you for organizing.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.